Would members of the Licensing and Standards Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Committee Room 1 for quorum. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm calling this meeting to order. We have a quorum. Yes. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 23rd meeting of the Licensing Standards Committee meeting. As usual, I would like to remind everyone that you can find the agenda for today's meeting and follow the meeting in real time at www.toronto.ca/council. The Licensing Standards Committee gratefully acknowledges that we're meeting on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat, and home of the many diverse Indigenous peoples. Any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, members of the committee? If none, none noted. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of October the 20th, 2017, moved by Councillor Giorgio? All those in favor? Against? Carried. Thank you, Councillor Giorgio. The speakers list we have this green sheet of deputants. So far, we have 31 deputants that have been registered. Members of the committee, what I would like to do at this point is that that speakers who have not pre-registered be allowed to register to speak until 10 o'clock this morning. And after that, no further registrations be allowed. So I would like to have that motion in. And the length of public presentations be limited to 3 minutes. Vice Chair? No, move the motion. You are moving the motion, fantastic. So we had a motion in terms of additional speakers until 10 o'clock and presentations to be limited to 3 minutes. All those in favor? Against? Carry. Councilor Burnside, do you have a motion?
Sure do, if you can put it on the screen. Well, I may as well start reading. The questions to staff from members of council take place after the public deputations, be 5 minutes in total, and only 1 round of questions per councillor. Point 2, that questions of speakers by members of council be limited to 3 minutes with 1 round of questions per councillor. And third part, the speaking times for all members of council be limited to 5 minutes, once again, with only 1 round of speaking per councillor.
Great. So, questions to move it?
Why are we moving that direction? We just see how it goes, and when we get there, that we're able to do that. We might have questions that the staff do not answer the first round, or they take too long to answer, and you might want to have a second round.
And thank you, Vice Chair. And just let me bring to your attention
Is that
that
a question
in
for
terms
me?
of
Can I answer it?
Sure, if you can, if you want to.
Well, I think the point is, we have an opportunity to question staff, but while other things are going on, we can also question staff offline if we need further clarification. So I think it's in the interest of everyone here that we try to keep this meeting within a certain time frame.
Councillor, with all due respect, and certainly agree with you that we should limit questions of speakers to a short time, but for us to make a clear decision, if we need a second round of questioning staff, the 1 or 2 of us, I don't think that's inappropriate.
Well, I guess we can ultimately vote on it. My position is, I respect your position. My position happens to be different.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilor Bernstein, for clarifying it. Just what I would like to add to it is that in terms of quorum, we are just struggling with quorum throughout the day today. 2 members of council are away, and we also have some commitments and throughout the day. So I think that's important to focus, to listen carefully, and not to be repetitive with the same statements over and over again. So I think these recommendations are in order, and therefore I'm calling a vote on that. All those in favor of the recommendations before us? Against? It carries. Thank you. Communications, do we have any additional communications there? So we have communications that will be distributed. And today we have in the agenda 1 item, and that's LS 23.1, licensing and registration regulations for short-term rentals. So that item is being held for deputations, and we'll get on with it. Okay, we'll start with, we have a presentation from city staff, and then we'll get on with the speakers.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm happy to introduce, for those of you who may not know him, Michael Mitzi, our Director in City Planning, in charge of the zoning team. We provided this presentation to Planning and Growth Management yesterday, so we thought it only proper that we provide the same level of service to this committee. We're going to take a quick run through what you have in front of you on the matter of short-term rentals. Michael's going to help address the zoning piece that was dealt with yesterday at PGM, and away we go. And I'm Tracy Cook, the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing and Standards, in case you weren't familiar with me. Just checking. So the issue of short-term rentals, and this is following from the evolution that's occurred in the last number of years of people offering their homes or parts of their homes for what is colloquially referenced as home sharing. Airbnb is the larger of the platforms, or largest of the platforms globally, and certainly that is also the case for the City of Toronto. There are other platforms involved in the short-term rental space, all of whom have been engaged through this process. So just for a sense of scale, we're over in and around 12,000 properties in the City of Toronto rented on the Airbnb platform. Airbnb was helpful in providing us data through this process, so it's a lot of that we're relying on. Of note, at least 53% of the listings of the data that we had at the time are located in downtown. Go ahead. So just to take us back for a moment how we got here, we had a direction from Executive Committee to undertake a review of short-term rental and develop look at developing a regulatory regime to address the impetus of short-term rental. We brought a framework report to the Executive Committee in June. We went back out and did additional consultations on the proposed framework, and the direction was to return to each of 3 committees with the applicable piece of the regulation. As I mentioned, Planning and Growth Management dealing with the zoning and amendments to zoning was yesterday. We today are here dealing with the licensing and registration piece, and there's a third part dealing with taxation that will come at a later point. The intention is that at the minimum, these 2 reports will be joined together at City Council at the council meeting in December. Just briefly going back to the consultations, we've had numerous public meetings, numerous stakeholder engagements, some very focused discussions with particular participants. We had over 9,000 responses to 2 online public surveys and undertook a stakeholder workshop with Mars Solutions Lab as well to help inform this entire process. We've approached this review and this work with a few key principles at their heart: that permitting people to rent their homes for short periods, that we minimize negative impacts to housing affordability and availability, but at the same time recognize a diversity or enabling a diversity in tourism accommodations while maintaining community stability, minimizing nuisances, and attempting to create a regulatory scheme that is fair, balanced, and easy for people to follow.
I'll speak briefly on the zoning matters. The report and draft zoning amendments that were before the Planning and Growth Management Committee yesterday were to create and define a new land use, short-term rental. This new use will mean that all or part of a dwelling unit that is used to provide sleeping accommodations for any rental period that is less than 28 days, consecutive days, and the principal residence of a short-term provider. Short-term rental as a defined use, if approved by council, would be permitted citywide in any residential zone and in the residential component of a mixed-use zone. The definition proposed yesterday, for your information, was in keeping with that tabled and adopted by the Executive Committee at its meeting this past summer on June 19th. As proposed, short-term rental would be permitted in any residential building type. And as previously stated, it would have to be provided in the principal residence of a short-term rental operator. Within their principal residence, a person could rent, according to what we presented yesterday, their dwelling unit, a bed sitting room, but no more than 3, and a secondary suite. Now, it's important for this committee to know, though I'm sure most of you probably do, that a motion was tabled yesterday by Councillor Bilal that proposed to not permit secondary suites to be included in the definition of short-term rental, and that was adopted unanimously. Also, a second motion was brought forward yesterday by Councillor Fillion that based on the considerable discussion and questions yesterday, that if the City Planning Division requires or feels it's necessary to provide clarity to council or modify its recommendations, that we can do so. So for the committee's added reference, and it's shown in that last bullet, short-term rental, if approved, will not be permitted in a vehicle. And I'll turn it back over to Tracy.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So the piece of this regulatory regime that's in front of you today is that dealing with the creation of a standalone short-term rental bylaw. Firstly, what we're proposing is a registration system for the people who want to rent out their principal residence or parts thereof, and as we've referenced them as operators throughout the report. They would be required to register with the city and pay an annual fee and provide a certain number of other provisions, including a contact person 24/7, keeping records. They must ensure any property used for short-term rental complies with all applicable laws, including the Ontario Building Code and the Ontario Fire Code. The proposed regulation allows for rental of any portion of the home, as Michael has indicated, that now looks like up to 3 separate bedrooms. It has excluded the secondary suite based on PGM's direction yesterday. So they can share rooms in their home for an unlimited number of days, 365 days a year. If the principal resident chooses to rent out their entire property, we've proposed a maximum that occurs for 180 nights in a year, approximately just shy of 6 months. In the short-term rental bylaw, we're looking to define principal residence as a dwelling unit owned or rented by a person, alone or jointly, with another person where they are ordinarily resident. This means it must be an individual person. A corporation cannot hold a principal residence, and each person can only have one principal residence. In the registration process, at over 18 years of age, thank you. So, yeah, at least 18 years of age. And I'm not covering every single point. Thank you, Councillor DeGiorgio. There are some additional provisions in there we just didn't put in the presentation, but they must be, yes, over 18 years of age, and all the other rules apply. What we have indicated through the registration process, a submission of certain information, including identification, though noted that identification has not as yet been prescribed. We've identified in the recommendation it be identification as identified by myself. The goal in addressing the registration approach was to ensure that we did not unnecessarily burden those people who are primarily going to willfully comply, but at the same time allow for us to collect the appropriate amount of information to advance our registration and municipal interests in enforcement. On the platform side, we're proposing a business license for the short-term rental platform. They would be subject to a $5,000 application fee at the first instance, and then their licensing fee would be comprised of based on a $1 per night booked from there forward. There's certain requirements on the platform as well, which is listed within the report, including they can only list properties that have a registration number. The city would be issuing registration numbers to the operators, and also having to develop procedures to deal with nuisance and other conditions. So from an implementation standpoint, we're heading to council. Subject to that, we have identified a potential date of June 1st for a come into force and effect date. I think it's important to note, because everybody's riveted to what I'm saying right now. Anybody listening back there? All good? Okay. All right. Just checking. Hi, Tony. I think really what was important is that we were attempting to balance the interests of our homeowners and our resident tenants, the neighborhoods where this activity is occurring, at the same time recognizing that it can provide economic benefit to the city, at the same time recognizing that we have a challenge with availability and affordability of housing in the city for owners and renters, and this can provide an opportunity for them as well. So that's a very high-level presentation on what you have before you. We'll look forward to answering questions after the deputations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Well done. So now we'll move on to speakers. The first deputant is Richard de Sam Lazaro, followed by Caitlin O'Neill and Ryan Kellen Sonder. Good morning. Good to have you here. You have 3 minutes, and we have the timers on that corner that you can. Please go ahead.
D. Sam Lazaro. I'm speaking here today on behalf of the Expedia family of brands, including vacation rental leaders HomeAway and Vacation Rentals by Owner. Expedia and HomeAway are supportive of all 5 guiding principles identified by city staff for the regulations of short-term rentals. In particular, we recognize that even though Toronto's rental vacancy rate was much lower in the 1990s, the availability of long-term rental housing is a major concern, and housing affordability in Toronto is an important challenge. Additionally, the Council seeks to ensure that short-term rentals do not create major nuisances, especially with regard to noise. But although we agree with most of City staff's recommendations, we do not believe they've struck the right balance when it comes to their proposal to restrict short-term rentals to principal residences. In fact, we believe a principal residence restriction would be in direct conflict with another guiding principle identified by city staff to enable greater diversity in tourism accommodations. We also note that in the only scientific study commissioned by the city, 67% of Torontonians supported allowing short-term rentals in secondary residences. So let's be frank, the current problem with short-term rentals is not related to secondary residences. The problem is investors purchasing many dwellings in a single building purely for conversion into short-term rentals. The principal residence restriction unnecessarily risks eliminating a type of accommodation that has long been available in Toronto to traveling families. Traveling families who want kitchens, washing machines, separate bedrooms, amenities that are not available affordably in hotels. Moreover, in our experience, families typically want whole home rentals, not to stay in someone else's residence. We believe that a principal residence restriction would make it more difficult for families to visit Toronto, harming tourism. To achieve the balanced outcome we all want, we're seeking for this committee to replace the principal residence restriction with 1 short-term rental license per person, an idea noted, if not endorsed, by city staff in their report. This change would eliminate the current problem of investors buying up condos for conversion into short-term rentals, ensure that traveling families enjoy a diverse choice of accommodations, safeguarding Toronto, as an attractive and affordable destination for families, and be much easier for the city to enforce than a principal residence restriction. We believe the council should heed the 2/3 of Torontonians who support short-term rentals in secondary residences. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Vice Chair Karigiannis?
Thank you, Chair.
3 minutes.
What we have in front of us here today is to change the definition of a house. So in us looking at changing the definition of the house, that means allowing that house to run as a business. Would you agree that maybe we should also look at maybe allowing a guy that has a house that also has a garage to paint, fix cars in his garage? Somebody that has a house also to have a barber shop in his basement? Somebody that teaches piano to have piano lessons in their home? Would you be also supporting something like that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. And I think it's important to recognize that in HomeAway's experience, the customers that stay in HomeAway properties tend to be, our typical customer, I should say, is a 53-year-old mother.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yes, sorry.
But would you agree with the proposals that I just put you forward?
Well, sir, I can't speak to the nature of other businesses. I would say that in our experience, we do not provide the disruption that may be caused by the building or the businesses that you described.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bernstein.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. I was a little unclear as to why you think having one being a registration per person would be better than the principal residence.
Certainly. First, and I think most importantly, as the council seeks to address the issue of housing availability and affordability, we need to acknowledge that the problem is an investor from outside of Toronto or from inside Toronto buying up entire floors of a condo building, entire chunks of a condo building for conversion into this market. By allowing only one license per resident, and we propose that it be one license per resident of Toronto who's achieved the age of majority, we limit the impact on housing availability of the short-term rental market.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, we address the impact on housing availability of the short-term rental market. Additionally, in our experience, traveling families do not want to stay in someone else's house. They want the run of the house, they want the washing machine, the bedrooms, the convenience that comes with being able to stay under one roof.
Gotcha. Okay, now I understand where you're going. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Burnside. Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation. Kathleen O'Neill.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Caitlin O'Neill. I'm the Public Policy Director for Sonder, and I'm joined by my colleague Ryan Killeen, who heads up our local operations here. He's next up on the list, but he'll be joining me instead. Sonder is a professional short-term rental provider here in Toronto. We appreciate having been invited to consult with the Municipal Licensing and Standards Division, but we're disappointed that our business model has not been accounted for and is not included in the proposed recommendations that are before you today. Sonder is a Montreal-founded technology startup and hospitality company that provides short-term stays to travelers in cities across the world. You'll see most of our units in multifamily buildings, in vibrant neighborhoods that have a lot of commercial activity, such as restaurants or shops, because our guests want to enjoy Toronto like a local, but with added amenities like Sonder's concierge service. So our model allows us an extra layer of control over each rental that most platforms can't provide, and it means that we can directly address civic concerns like nuisance and like cleanliness. So for example, trash never piles up in the streets because our local housekeeping partners regularly maintain the units. We understand the desire to limit the use of residential property for short-term rentals, and that's why we're urging the creation of a new licensing category for commercial operators that would be permitted only for short-term rental units within commercial zones. We would be pleased to add a greater regulatory burden for these commercial operators, such as $1 million of liability insurance on each unit, 24/7 support from local management teams, and remittance of any applicable taxes as part of this process. The former mayor of Austin, Lee Leffingwell, actually submitted a letter to Mayor Tory and council back in September about how he learned firsthand the downside of regulation, which effectively bans all whole home short-term rentals. In his letter, he explained that family travelers desire this model and will seek it out even if it exists underground, and that contrary to popular belief, traditional whole home short-term rentals did not have a clear impact on housing stock or affordability in his city. Providers like Sonder are allowing travelers to experience the real Toronto by fully immersing themselves in the local culture, and we hope that the committee will support the development of short-term rental policy that best reflects the innovations of this industry. We thank you for your time, and we're both available for questions.
Thank you. Questions? Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair, through you to the Deputy, and thank you for coming today. Really appreciate your thoughts. You are an operator, if I'm not mistaken?
That's correct. So the difference between us and a platform like Airbnb or HomeAway is that we're operating the units ourselves.
Okay. So you have a whole bunch of units that you're operating?
In the City of Toronto, we currently have 12. We decided to pause growth and work with the city to be a part of the regulatory.
So if you have a house or a unit close to me and some disturbances happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, the renters or the visitors all of a sudden decide to have a little party, how do you put a stop to it?
Ryan can best answer that question because he's usually the guy putting the stop to it.
So my phone rings at 3 a.m. in the morning. We have a local team here on the ground that addresses all concerns, so we're readily available 24/7 through a 1-800 number. We're then contacted locally, and we address the situation as needed.
Would you go to the house and tell them to stop?
Absolutely.
So you have 12. What happens when you grow to be 200? Will you have enough people in order to do that?
So when we grow to a size like that, the city team will also grow as well to accommodate the amount of units that we have. So our operation team will always be able to kind of attend to anything we need to.
And how do the neighbors know that this is your unit and who to call?
So we quite often go to our neighbors and tell them exactly what we're doing. We stay away from single-family homes like you've used in this example, but people around us are well aware of what we do. If we're in a building that's, say, a walk-up, the landlords or anyone that could be affected around us do have our contact info.
If you're in an apartment or in a house, then you would go to a couple of houses to the right, to the left, on the same floor, and you will tell them who you are, what you're doing, here's your phone number, just in case there's some concerns.
That's correct. We're very transparent about it.
Okay, so you would be supportive of the city then. Would you be supportive of the city saying to whoever the company is or the operators that before you're licensed, that you must notify your neighbors?
That's
We
a
do it right now.
component that we would agree with. That's something we currently do in our practice, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Di Giorgio, the floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this notion that you brought up about a special license in a commercial area, just help me understand a little bit better, because in commercial areas, especially mixed-use areas or even commercial areas, we have multi-residential buildings. So in essence, are you saying that we're creating a special license for commercial condominium residential places or units that are available? Is that what we're driving at?
Thank you for your question, Counselor. The idea is that we believe it's important to limit commercial operations of short-term rentals in residential zones.
Right.
Those tend to be the zones that have more, single-family
Secondary
homes,
units and all that.
families, nuisance issues. We believe that the commercial operation of short-term rentals is more appropriate in commercial zones where other commercial businesses are allowed to be, oftentimes hotels as well. There's more of a transient nature in those zones, and nuisance is less of a concern.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, would it be possible for you for the committee to get a copy of your submissions? Yes. That'd be great. Thank you. The next deputants, we have Alex Dagg, followed by Brian Anderson, and Fariba Anderson, and Patrick Shaw. Good morning. Good to have
Good
you here.
morning. Good morning. My name is Alex Dagg. I'm the Airbnb's Public Policy Manager here in Canada. Thank you very much for your time today. The recommended approach before you has been carefully considered and extensively consulted on by staff for almost 2 years. These are tough rules, both for hosts and for platforms like Airbnb, one of 14 short-term rental platforms that are active in Toronto. While many of the proposed rules make sense, there are still some significant issues that need to be fixed. We are encouraged to see that the proposed rules are clear. Torontonians are allowed to share their principal residence in Toronto, their home. Most of our hosts share only their principal residence, and they care about their homes and their neighbors. That's why the proposed 180-day cap on nights for entire unit rentals is redundant. A principal residence restriction is already a cap in and of itself and filters out commercial operators. The City of Vancouver on Tuesday already recognized this. They voted on regulations on Tuesday with no night cap, no burdensome rules for hosts to prove primary residence, and no prohibited buildings list in the City of Vancouver. The additional cap only hurts families legitimately sharing their homes who may happen to be away for large chunks of the year and whose home would never be on the long-term rental market. It also adds more red tape and burden for everyone. I know a host living in Toronto who works elsewhere during the week. He works in a small town all week. He comes home to his home on the weekend in Toronto. A 180-day night cap restricts him from being able to share his home during the week and punishes him for no good reason at all. Our biggest priority is protecting our hosts' ability to continue to share their homes. A typical host in Toronto earns less than $5,000 a year through home sharing, well below Canada's threshold for collecting and remitting HST. We also have many people sign up to host on our platform who never end up hosting a guest or choose not to list their home. That's why we believe the proposed $50 annual host registration fee is reasonable. And it's why we support staff's recommendation for a straightforward registration process. We welcome and we want our hosts to have the opportunity to participate lawfully and equally in this economy. And we know from our experience around the world that when registration is burdensome, you get less of it. The recommendations for regulating home sharing and short-term rentals reflect the thorough work of city staff. They embrace responsible home sharing, yet are clear that commercial short-term rentals will be illegal in Toronto. We've identified some issues that need further consideration, and we're ready to work together to address them. We're strongly encouraging you to ensure that home sharing and short-term rentals in Toronto are embraced in a balanced way. As Toronto is actively trying to attract leading tech and innovation companies here, it is important to send a clear signal that the city is embracing regulations that are open to innovation and our changing economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the deputant? Vice Chair Karygiannis.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the fact that you come down really with some thoughts. Now, this individual that you talked about, he's away. So if we're allowed, according to staff, that would mean that he can rent his house out for 180 nights.
Yes, Yes, the proposal is he lives in Toronto, he works in a smaller town during the week, he home shares during that week when he's away.
Now-
180-day night cap will restrict his ability to do that for the nights that
He rents the house for how much? $100 a day, $200 a day?
It's probably less than that. I'm not sure what the actual rate is, but it helps him afford to continue to stay and live in Toronto.
What's your average rates for a room in a house?
I can check, but I believe it varies quite a bit. It's probably around $90 a night.
$90 a night for one room.
It depends on what it is.
So for a
In
house-
this- If I could just explain, Counselor, in this case, it's his entire home, so it's likely more than $90 a night. Often a room in a home is $70, $80, $90.
So if it's the whole house, what are you looking at, $200?
It depends how nice the house is. It's probably 100-something a night.
Okay, so he could actually step over the threshold of the 30,000.
It's possible, depending on how much he's earning, and if he has stepped over the threshold, he's required to get an HST number and collect
So would you,
and remit the taxes.
would you be adverse to us in licensing saying that we would like to see the HST registration?
So we believe that's a violation of his personal identifiable information. The HST is a federal legislation. He's required, once he earns $30,000, to remit HST.
But you want us to have his address, you want us to have his phone number, we want us to have everything else from him, but not the fact that he is actually registered with HST? I mean, this is a lot of money that we're talking about here, the 13%, and some of it does flow down to help our hospitals, does flow down to help our schools, fix our roads and everything else.
Yes,
Wouldn't you
and-
agree with me that the person should be stepping up and putting in his HST on the line?
Well, HST is a federal jurisdiction, and we actually do work with the federal government to try to proactively partner with them to ensure that the hosts are complying with whatever rules apply to them, such as HST, such as paying their federal income tax, so that, all of those things do benefit the city of Toronto.
Now, saying that you partner up with the federal government, my question is twofold. One, do you provide the federal government all your clients? One, and two, do you recommend and do you suggest, and is it in your contract, that everybody that goes over 30,000 has an HST?
So we're an internet platform. The people who use and put content on our platform are required to follow whatever rules that exist in the environment, like paying income tax, like
So
remitting
you
HST.
said you partner with the federal government. How?
We've partnered with the Canada Revenue Agency in a proactive model to ensure that our hosts are educated about their obligations under the Tax Act. And the CRA has been
Thank
very
you, Chair.
supportive of our partnership.
You got my answer, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I do have a question.
Okay.
Would you be kind enough to share with us your presentation and make it available as a submission for further consideration?
Of course.
Perhaps with city staff as we proceed to council?
Sure, of course,
Thank
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, no, one more question. Councilor Side, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, and I may have missed it, so my apologies. What's your position on the principal residence versus people able to have one property associated with their name, not necessarily a principal residence?
I mean, we appreciate the suggestions to move to a one host, we call it like a one host, one address kind of policy. Some cities have done that. The advantage of that is it makes it easier to enforce in terms of the city's obligations for that. We've been trying to partner with the city for many years and move forward. So we're, if the city moves towards a principal residence, we'll continue to work with the city on a principal residence as well. But there are certain advantages to definitely going to a one house, one address.
So sorry, I understand what the advantages are for the city.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand your position from a corporate standpoint.
Yeah, well, look, the majority of our hosts are already sharing their primary residence in Toronto, and what we have said is to make sure that it's the definition of what a primary resident should be as flexible enough as possible to not, affect Torontonians who are just trying to live in a very expensive city and try to afford their home. There are people who travel and work between Toronto and Ottawa. The question is, which is their principal residence? By calling a one host, one address system, then doesn't get into, well, if I have a place in Ottawa, which one is my principal residence? So there are advantages to that for our business model and for the city of Toronto in terms of enforcement.
So if I were to summarize what you just told me, you prefer it?
Look, I think, no. Look, I think if it's the direction the city goes, it's a smart direction for the city to go in. We're willing to work with the city on a principal residence as well. We're just trying to be good partners.
It's not your biggest concern?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Burnside. Any other questions? If not, thanks so much for your presentation. Brian Anderson. Good morning, sir. Good to have you here. Please go ahead, 3 minutes.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman and council members. I will get right to the point of why I'm sitting here today, and that has to do with the maximum cap of 180 nights. And I don't understand why that is being proposed. I believe it was mentioned earlier. It's almost like there's a double regulation here of it already providing that this is a primary residence. And my case really has to do with my daughter, who has a primary residence, attending a university outside of Toronto. Obviously, the money that she's making is helping her pay for education and avoiding borrowing money in order to do so. And she is away for more than 180 days. She comes back on some weekends, Christmas, Easter, and that kind of stuff. So the model of renting out longer term doesn't really apply for us. But I don't understand why we're infringing on her ability to make money by capping it at 180 days. My suggestion would be that be removed.
Thank you. We have questions for you, sir. Councilor DiGiorgio, you are the first one.
Yeah, just a question in the form of a comment. There are, from an income tax, a federal income tax point of view, people who are not in their residence for a certain number of days lose the designation of principal residency, I think, in Canada. So if someone is out of the country, for example, there might be implications to their renting their, what is deemed to be a principal residence, but you lose the principal residency if you're out of the country. So I'm not sure how it works with respect to out of state.
Thank you, Councilman. There are some residency issues regarding people that spend more than 180 days outside of the country. And I think perhaps that was part of the mind, maybe snowbirds renting their house for 6 months while they're away kind of thing is why it came into this. No, my daughter goes to University of Montreal, McGill. She's within Canada, and she doesn't, because she's going to school, it has no impact on her primary residence. But the 180-day cap would impact her ability to generate money. And if she goes beyond the 30,000, she'll be paying HST, which is falls under federal jurisdiction.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Giorgio. Vice Chair Karygiannis, next.
Thank you. Your daughter, sir, that is going to Montreal. It's indeed a great town. My question is, her primary residence, is it Toronto or Montreal?
Her primary residence is in Toronto. She has a car with an Ontario license plate. She carries her OHIP card. Like any student that is going to a different province, they're not a resident of that province. They're simply a student for that time.
I had some other questions, but I think they're going to be nature of privacy, so I will not ask them. I'll ask them offline with you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, sir. Ariva Anderson. Morning, sir. Good to have you here. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Oh, I got out of order.
If you're kind enough to state your name, please.
Yes, my name is Fariba Anderson.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm a CEO of AcuteNet, a sharing economy platform for the healthcare industry. My purpose for presentation to you today is to share with you the opportunities infrastructure such as Airbnb are providing for innovation in our city. You in your packages received an information from me. My company is pioneering sharing economy for the healthcare industry, for payers and providers, so we can provide the power of technology so patient care and home care specifically can be delivered in a much more economical manner. So the reason that I am here, it's because within the sector of elder, senior citizen, the opportunity to build long-term care facilities and provide housing and care for them is very limited. In fact, Toronto Star had an article in August where they featured home sharing as a solution for senior citizens. My company has been in this space for about 3 years, providing clinical assessment and care plans to a number of physicians, clinicians, and nurses around the world, specifically in the Toronto area through CCACs and local health integration network. I have a very good insight into the challenges our senior citizens are facing in terms of not having the opportunity to share their assets and being forced out of their home because we do not have an infrastructure for them to be able to take advantage of the economy of sharing. As you consider all these regulations, I would like you to look into a future whereby there is not going to be enough resources for everyone to have their own homes. We need to learn to share, and we need to be able to collaborate with each other. Your policies and your regulations that you are establishing today, it is going to have profound effect on our future, on our civic foundation, on our social contract, on our ability to use the power of technology to ensure that we have a city that is welcoming to everyone and provides opportunity to everyone. And that's what I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, to bring to you an aspect of sharing economy that hopefully expands your horizons to think about the future and not limit us because of today's challenges.
Thank you. We have questions for you. Vice Chair Jim Karygiannis.
Thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate your thoughts. So these, would you support that the person that's renting the operator also, besides being the primary residence, also live in the house?
Absolutely. I think that however you look at it, you need to look at what is good for our civic society. And this is what you are put in charge as our representatives to make sure what the decision you make, the limitation or the restriction, that they are good for our society.
Thank you. Now, if I am the traveler and I'm coming to Toronto, I'd like to make sure that the place that I will go to stay in is clean, and of course, the platform will take care of that. I also want to make sure that the person that I'm going to stay in and bring my belongings and myself is a person who's reputable and a person that does not have a criminal record. Would I be incorrect in that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say that all the work that Ms. Cook has done and the city staff had done, licensing, all of that, these are fabulous, collecting taxes, all of these are fantastic because I'm just asking that you don't restrict them.
My follow-up question would be, if I am the traveler, as you said, and you want to make sure that I'm coming into a house which the person doesn't have a criminal record, would you object that the operators provide the city with a criminal background check? So the traveler that comes into Toronto has a clear mind that they're going into a well-respected house and they're not going to a house that they might have some difficulty in.
I would say when you look at that, if you think as our champion of our city, that's a good thing to do. That's the kind of policing that is needed. I trust your judgment because you're representing us, and I trust that you will do the right thing in regulations.
But are you agreeing, yes or no, that all the operators should have a police clearance?
Frankly, the people who operate hotels, if you're going to do that, then I would expect every person that works in a hotel that I also submit a criminal check just to make sure people that comes and cleans my room in my hotel, that they also have criminal background check. Would say make it fair for everybody.
I mean, a lot of the hotels that I've traveled and I stayed with, the people that are actually the cleaners there, I believe they must have background checks and the hotel is bonded.
Yeah,
Right,
so
thank
as a city, you might want to apply that to all the hotel operators too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Now we have Patrick Brown.
I'll be Patrick Shaw, but...
Oh, I'm sorry. We have,
Brown will
okay.
have to be Patrick
Yeah,
Brown.
I'm sorry. My mistake. My apologies. Patrick Shaw, followed by Hussein Hassan. Good morning. Good to have you here. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Chair, councilors and staff and guests here today. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the report released by the Licensing and Standard Committee. My name is Patrick Shaw, and I'm here today representing myself. And I come to my comments through a fulsome career involved in providing support to and for innovation. And there's a recurring theme, as we've seen in the last few presenters. For nearly 10 years just past, I've provided operations leadership to a GTA organization best described as a board of trade for tech entrepreneurs, with nearly 200 small and mid-size member companies sharing their innovation dreams and nightmares through curated monthly peer-to-peer exchanges. Toronto's reputation as a center of innovation is one of its greatest assets. The city has considerable resources dedicated to raising awareness of that and towards attracting innovative organizations to consider Toronto as a preferred global location to build, grow, and sustain their operations. I applaud and encourage your efforts in this committee. Embracing the opportunities of the new economy, the sharing economy is often referred to this morning already, addressing the new challenges that come with it, complicated for sure by the objective of doing so without dampening the business enthusiasm needed to advance those developments. I understand the need for the city to develop regulations for home sharing. That being said, I urge you to consider the importance of keeping in mind the very business climate the city has sought, one that fosters and rewards technology advancements and innovation. This requires a balanced approach to regulating new industries without overburdening operators and platforms. I have a deep respect for the orderly planning and implementation that the city, and indeed our democracy, supports. There are global eyes on your deliberations here too. The balance achieved through your considerations will be sending messages to very large and to very small players alike. While Airbnb is the obvious focus to many, we know that Amazon and Global Toronto must be watching how you deliberate and decide on these matters in this process. Let's welcome these innovations in a collaborative and respectful manner. And additionally, the tech innovators and entrepreneurs I know and work with increasingly live and work in multiple locations. Again, seems to be a recurring scenario that you have to address before you. And they may have multiple residences that they want to short-term rent. Flexibility to do so means that at any stage of their company growth, they may use a platform sharing like Airbnb in their travels as they raise capital or inexpensively visit to collaborate and develop and innovate with others in other jurisdictions and locations. I think one of the challenges that I want to acknowledge and encourage you to try and address.
Please wrap up. Try to wrap up.
Okay. Oh, you want me to finish that?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
You have only 3 minutes and you have 40 additional seconds.
The thing in my career I always found difficult was when I could make a decision based on the information I had in front of me, and then very quickly after that, new information came that I might have changed how I would have resolved that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Any questions? Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
Hasnain Hassan, if I mispronounce your name, please forgive me.
Hasnain Hassan.
Please go ahead, 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hasnain Hassan, and I'm a manager for Toronto Furnished Living. We are a company, we are actually in the business of providing short-term accommodation facilities, and we have been doing this business since 2005. Short-term is actually a growing segment in many cities around the world, and in our opinion, it is actually in the city's best interest to take advantage of this important segment through proper regulations and by encouraging companies to provide these services, thereby promoting fair competition. So we would prefer, that short-term market is actually regulated. However, it should be regulated through proper channels, so that fair competition could be achieved. Our research has indicated that there are many groups that rely heavily on short-term market. For example, newly arrived immigrants, they rely on it. Patients from different cities, countries. We have partnered with many hospitals as well. So patients who actually come from different cities, out of provinces, they need actually accommodation facilities. They prefer to actually stay in an apartment as opposed to a hotel to avoid, saving money, and apartments also provide facilities that are not available, in hotels. Now, we also provide services to refugees. Now, we are expecting, more refugees would actually come to the city of Toronto. Where would they stay? Hotels are expensive for them, so they actually need, short-term accommodation facilities. Out-of-town workers. Toronto is actually one of the main cities in this country, rather. People who actually come, from other provinces, they move here, they need accommodation facilities. In our opinion, we would prefer that the city imposes short-term taxes and also, license each and every property and host and representatives, must be available, at the time of check-in. Also, proposals presented by Airbnb and other critics are actually one-sided and do not reflect the actual position of the city. Toronto is actually a world-class city, and to maintain its stature, the city and the government must work together to help the city grow and solve the issues that affect actually all of us. Now, our company has been in existence since 2005. So we actually find rather, unfair, that because of Airbnb's growth, our, business model has today been affected. We have done some research, and in our opinion, construction workers, English language students, when students, from other countries.
Thank you, sir.
Toronto.
Questions? Vice Chair Karygiannis.
Thank you, sir. I take it that you provide accommodations for all these people that you mentioned.
Yes, sir. We are doing this for a long time.
You mentioned refugees. Would that be refugee claimants that you're providing accommodations for?
Well, refugees who come here, like sometimes there are agencies in the city who actually, we work with some agencies. So we actually, the agencies
My
actually pay
question,
us.
sorry, no, mean to, refugee claimants, are you providing accommodations for them? Yes or no, sir?
We provide accommodation services to
So
some.
you're gouging,
Sorry?
you are gouging people that are coming to Canada to seek refuge. You're charging
Councilor
them rent.
Karygiannis, please be
Sorry,
mindful in
So,
terms
I
and be
am,
respectful
Chair.
with.
I am very
No, it's,
Chair?
those are not the
Legally,
terms
they
that
come
we're
here,
going to allow.
Sorry, my question is, sir, are you charging refugee claimants that are coming seeking refuge in Canada? Are you charging
sir,
them rent?
The agencies, they send us refugees to actually live in our accommodation, so we don't build the refugees.
And you're charging them?
Well, we get money from the agencies, yes. However, at a subsidized rate, not, at a regular rates.
Okay, sir. You know what? As the newcomer's advocate, I take exception to your comments, but I thank you.
Any other questions? So just one question. In terms of providing accommodation, so you work with refugee agents that are working with the city and other levels of government to assist them in the shortage if there is a need for?
Yes, so we work with a wide variety of clientele, like language students, out-of-town workers, newly arrived immigrants, patients, they need to stay close to hospitals. Hotels are expensive, they prefer to stay in an apartment. So that's where, because like we have been doing this business since 2005, so that's 12 good years. So we are, quite involved in this business, so we have understood this market quite well. So like we have been noticing, that this is actually a growing segment. We cannot, regulate it just by, banning short-term market. That will just not cause any solution to this problem.
So you are not creating a second tier in terms of service for refugees. You are working with existing agents that we have that are working with the city and other levels of government.
Absolutely. Not only to refugees, we provide services to like English language schools in Toronto. When students come here to learn English for a few weeks, I mean, they would prefer to stay in an apartment as opposed to a hotel.
And the units are furnished as well.
Totally furnished, yes. That's what we do.
Thank you, sir. Another question, Councilor Di Giorgio.
Just to try and understand the nature of your business, it seems to be quite, in my view anyway, unique. So when you provide housing for people, home sharing, let's say.
Yes, sir.
Are you focusing on home sharing where they have exclusive use of the property or of the home? Or are you looking at actually situations where people cohabit? Like if I have a principal residence, I might bring somebody in on a short-term basis to live in my basement, let's say, or...
That is a good question. Our company gets apartments in bulk from the landlords.
Right.
And we then actually rent individual units to each party that actually wishes to stay in our units. Now we
They have exclusive use of the
Exclusive
property.
usage.
Okay, so you're confining yourself to that quadrant, sort
Yes,
of.
so one unit will be for one person or for one family. The unit will not be shared by other individuals. Now we provide a wide variety of, accommodation, like studios, one bedroom, luxury one bedroom, two bedroom. So
Okay.
like to regulate this market, that will have a very, very negative impact on our business. Plus, like the short-term market will be negatively affected for sure. So, I mean, the city has to strike a proper balance, that there are many apartment companies in Toronto that do what we do.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you for your presentation, sir.
Thank you. Any other?
The next deputant is Linda Brett, followed by Catherine Lang and Caroline Miller. Ms. Brett, the floor is yours whenever you're ready. Before we start, are you making a joint presentation?
For me?
Are you
No,
making a
no,
joint
I don't know. She's the next person.
Oh, I see,
not
okay.
with me at all.
Okay.
For me?
Okay, Ms.
She's on
Brett.
deck.
Please go ahead. The floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Linda Brett. I'm president of the Bush Street East Neighborhood Association. I come to you today with respect to recommendations on the issues within our footprint, as well as my own personal background as a tax specialist who has worked both with the CRA and as a tax consultant. First, I'm very pleased with the report that has come before you today. I deputed at the Executive Committee, participated at stakeholder consultations, as well as I made a lengthy submission to the municipal, to the city, primarily around the area of principal residence, drawing on my experience administering this definition for both the Income Tax Act and Ontario Tax Credit. I'm pleased to see that most of my suggestions and suggestions, references, and options for definitions coming forward in this report and having been considered. And I urge you to pass the report with minor revisions. Our suggested recommendations are, and this comes from my community association, a register of condominiums that does not permit short-term rentals be established. They be placed on the register. You can place yourself on the register upon proof of the restriction of your condominium. A one-time and/or renewal fee at a cost recovery be imposed. No operator license should be issued to an applicant at the prohibited condominium. We concur with the Planning and Growth Management Committee's recommendation for exclusion of secondary resident suites yesterday. My remaining issues relate to some minor issues within which that came out in the report. On page 3 in definitions 2.b, it describes what a short-term rental is. And I would like to add somewhere a clarification as to what is meant by payment. Does this include or exclude a barter transaction? In a barter transaction, the value of what is being bartered may be considered consideration. Is the intent to only include cash considerations or inclusive of barter transactions? My second is page 2C, an operator, and I put this in, and I know they considered it and didn't put it in, but I'm going to ask for it again. Consider allowing one operator license per family unit, only one per husband and wife, either married or living common law. I realize that's a very difficult definition, having administered it for different types of jurisdictions. Our third is compliance and audits, proof of principal residence, enforcement, and this enforcement with respect to all of the regulations. Our recommendations is an audit approach, an audit program established to randomly check all requirements, including proof of principal residence. If you'll just allow me a couple more seconds, I will indicate that I did watch yesterday and watched Ms. Cook explain that there would be some sort of active audit, but exactly how that would operate, i.e. on a smell test versus random, was not really clarified. So what I'm asking for is random.
Thank you, Ms. Brett.
Thank you.
Questions? Vice Chair Karijanis?
Thank you. I heard that you're an expert in taxation.
Yes, I practiced tax for 40 years.
If
Personal mostly.
if somebody's renting a part of their house on an ongoing basis, they must file that with the Revenue Canada.
Okay, you're required to disclose all your income from all sources.
Okay.
If there's a personal component, you're still required to report the income, but if you have a loss, your loss will be denied. So, and there's even a question as to whether you would be able to claim expenses. That's very technical.
It is very technical. So if I'm renting the bottom part of my house and it's 50%, then I can deduct 50% of the expenses that I have, including the mortgage, versus the income that I get.
That's it's complicated answer. If you're renting your basement and it's exclusive, and if it's not considered properties maintained for personal use, then your revenues would be taxed, your losses would be denied.
Okay.
And what you would be able to explain, claim as expenses would relate to joint operating costs.
But if I'm making money, I have to declare it.
You have to declare it anyways.
So then would you agree
Report
that-
it. We don't declare income, we report income.
Okay, so the people that are operating an Airbnb must also declare the income if it's more than 30,000, less than
No,
30,000?
that's HST. Income tax, you're
Sorry, I
required.
didn't say HST, I said declare the income.
No, you report income, you don't declare income. You declare expenses, you report income.
Let's not play with words. If I'm making money on Airbnb and I'm earning, and I make an income of $10,000, must I report it?
Yes.
Which is the same thing as a declaration.
You must report it on your income tax return. HST is a very,
I didn't ask about HST.
Yes, Councilor,
I've asked about reporting of
the answer,
okay.
you have the answer already. I'll be more than glad to clarify that answer that the deputant
I
gave
think
it to
I'm
you.
clear. You have to
Yeah,
report
it's
all your
very easy
income
to
from all
understand.
sources.
Okay, so you have to report your income from Airbnb.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then you ask me about.
Is a follow-up question on that one.
Sorry, thank you.
So under the, when we all have to do our income taxes throughout the year, if you have a rental property,
Yep.
it's our obligation for those who are landlords and to declare the rental income, either if you have a loss or
Yeah, in certain circumstances, depending on the extent of personal use of the actual property, your loss may be denied. In pure home sharing, where you're just supplementing costs, I'm sure that Revenue Canada would look at it as a loss denied.
So from that perspective, since we have federal laws that are compulsory on all of us in terms of declaring any incomes that could or could not be taxable, is there a need for a city government to interfere, to perhaps, I don't want to use the word interfere, but to suggest another level of taxation on it when we already have something that's in place? I just want some sort of clarification.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. You're asking if it's appropriate for the city to be levying an extra?
There is another report that's coming before the executive committee in terms of possible taxation on these sort of rentals. So apart from that, in relation to Councilor Carigiani's questions in terms of rental income as it pertains to the income tax, is there a need to have further clarification on it?
I'm sorry, I really don't understand.
Okay.
I'm not catching the nuance.
Yeah, it's a complex thing that Councilor Carigiani was trying to get at, and I was hoping that you'll have that answer. Councilor Di Giorgio, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in your support for the exclusion of secondary suites.
Yes.
And the reason I understand, well, you can perhaps answer that part for me, and then I'll give you a supplementary question. So your support is based primarily on retention of affordability of housing, is that?
Yes, yes. I've read through the report. I think the vacancy rates, both in condominiums and purpose-built rentals, is so low that any infringement on anything that could be a long-term rental unit for someone, and I heard yesterday a lot of comments, well, a lot of this is high-end and it wouldn't be impacted for the low-income or the affordable renting, and I say it does because there's a movement up. So if you take something out of the higher income, higher bracket, someone who's in a lower bracket that may be able to afford that, may be impacted in not being able to move up. So you're looking at a whole trickle-up effect or trickle-down of low vacancy rate.
Okay, let me give you a hypothetical situation.
Sure.
Let's assume, and I wish I owned a home where I could rent out a basement apartment for about $2,500 a month, okay? So how does that affect me? The fact that I may choose not to keep that secondary suite I don't want to rent it maybe all year long. I want to just have the flexibility of renting it every month, maybe only 6 months of the year. So how do I, by choosing to do that, how do I impact the affordable housing situation?
You may or may not. And I think yesterday they had a very long discussion with respect to this. And I don't think allowing secondary suites just because there are a few people, whomever they are, that would not put it on the rental market should preclude restricting it to allow anybody who would put it on the rental market. When I was at the executive committee deputing, there were a few people that talked about having had units on the rental market, and with Airbnb took them off the rental market. So you do have that happening, and I realize that there are some people that may be negatively impacted that would not put something on the rental market. But I think that as a city, we should be looking at how we're administering overall and understanding that all impacts are not going to be even, and there are some people that are going to be negatively impacted that you don't necessarily want to be negatively impacted. So you can't carve out little pieces that just help one person but not somebody else. It's a balance that I think that
Thank you.
that they considered, and the committee yesterday considered. That's a really difficult question.
Okay.
Thank you. That was the last question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation. Catherine Lang, followed by Caroline Miller and Barbara Wells. Good morning.
Morning.
Are we ready?
One moment.
Take your time.
There we go.
Okay,
Thanks for
great.
the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm appearing before the committee today to affirm the need for the much-needed regulation for short-term rentals in Toronto, to support many of the recommendations, and to argue for a revision to those regulations with respect to secondary suites, or to fulfill a loophole there. I'm here as a result of my own experience with unrestricted and unregulated short-term rentals in my downtown West neighborhood. For years, homeowners in my neighborhood have rented out affordable rooms or secondary suites to enable them to keep up with costs and stay in their homes. This is part of the diversity of housing in our city, and I really welcome it. However, a different scenario has been evolving for the last few years. Older folks have moved out or passed away, and in their place, investors who are absentee landlords have been buying houses. The small 2.5-story house next door to ours is owned by one of these investors. This summer, I learned that the owner of this property has used a variety of online platforms, including Airbnb, Housing.com, HouseMe.ca, bedandbreakfast.eu, Craigslist.ca, and others to advertise rooms and apartments in over 10 of his houses owned under his name or a number of numbered companies, and buildings across downtown Toronto, including our neighboring house. He rents primarily to young people from out of town or country, staying in Toronto short-term and seasonally. Issues related to noise, property maintenance, garbage management, vermin, and fire safety have been brought to the attention of city councillors and the Toronto Licensing and Property Standards staff for this landlord's properties in at least 3 other neighborhoods. Invariably, the landlord blames the problems on the tenants and not on his neglect and his budget business model. Through my research, I discovered that in 2014, 3 young people died in a fire in a building owned by this landlord not far from my home. He was not held responsible. This property owner has turned to platforms such as Airbnb and Housing.com to rent rooms short-term in the peak summer season in flats that were previously rented as apartments. It appears that people were moved around to the landlord's various properties using the online booking platforms for international promotion, then dispatching renters to rooms and apartments in unlisted houses. One telltale sign of this short-term rental activity for those of us living nearby was the presence of bare mattresses dropped off on porches or on lawns, as well as washed linens hanging on clotheslines and garbage and leftover furniture abandoned in front and backyards. Over June, July, and August of this year, the property next to ours housed up to 9 young people from outside of the country. The tenants rented by the room, each paying the landlord directly, sharing kitchen and bathrooms. These tenants began their stay in Toronto in the same owner's so-called budget Airbnb rooms in a house several blocks away. Only after tenants left at the end of the summer and after numerous complaints were made to the city did we learn that the house had been operated as an illegal rooming house.
Please wrap up.
I want to show some of the slides, and this is the house next to ours that was rented short-term. This is another a few blocks away that is and was very recently rented through Airbnb.
What I would like to do is to suggest that if you can provide us with your presentation so that can be available as a submission to city staff in terms of looking into it further.
I could do so. I didn't.
Can we do that?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. We have questions from members of council. And Councilor Kirjanis.
Thank you. So what your pictures show is that there was some difficulties on people renting the houses out on Airbnb. Would I be correct?
Airbnb and other platforms, yes.
So people coming in, was the landlord there or the house owner, or was it an absentee?
The landlord owns the houses under various numbered companies and as well as his own name, and he moves the tenants around from those that were advertised on Airbnb to other homes he owns.
Would you be supportive in order to avoid this, that the landlord that rents out or the operator has to be the principal resident and must be residing in the house? Will that take care of those?
As a principal, yes. Residents, yes, that was part of my presentation. I wasn't able to.
Would you want your neighbors to let you know that they're thinking about going on an Airbnb platform, like, 1 or 2 or 3 houses down, and come over to say, listen, I'm having some financial difficulties, I want to make some extra money, whatever, that I'm thinking of going to Airbnb. Would you appreciate that from your neighbor?
I would appreciate the city registering those properties. I don't need to know. We have neighbors who do use Airbnb responsibly, but we realize that without registering those folks and without a partnership with the platforms, other things can happen, such as what's happened to us.
Would you not be wanting to have a say if somebody next door to you has an Airbnb or not?
I would certainly be interested in knowing. There's no question about that, yes.
Okay. So you would then support your neighbor telling you, hey, I'm running an Airbnb, I'm going to have different
I would
people.
certainly appreciate that, and I would appreciate them being licensed and following all the city bylaws as well.
And also living in the house.
And in their principal residence.
Okay.
Yes.
Principal resident or also residing there?
That's a very good question. I'm sorry, I don't know the nuances of that, but
Okay.
we have an issue with this particular person, which is an example, but under different numbered companies.
but
I would prefer if they lived in that residence and rented those.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you for your presentation, ma'am. The next public speaker is Caroline Miller. Caroline Miller. Good morning. Good to have you here.
Mr. Chair, members of council.
Please.
My name is Caroline Miller, and I have been an Airbnb superhost in East York, Ward 31, for 3.5 years, and I support the current proposal to allow home sharing in Toronto. I operate my short-term rental out of the basement apartment of my primary residence, of which I am the sole occupant. I'm a proud citizen of Toronto, and I'm honored to offer newcomers to Canada, residents of Toronto, and tourists a place to call home for a short period of time. I agree that there is a lack of affordable long-term housing within Toronto, a fact that I am faced with every day as I assist members of our community through my work. My Airbnb listing is not suitable for a long-term permanent rental, as I frequently block out dates for visiting family and friends. My listing, on the other hand, is available for affordable short-term housing, which is also needed by citizens of Toronto, newcomers to Canada, and tourists. I frequently have requests from Torontonians who are looking for a short-term rental while they renovate their existing home, are in limbo between long-term accommodations, or are in a marital transition. Having a self-contained, fully furnished apartment with a full kitchen and laundry facilities gives these people what they need to continue on with their lives with little or no interruption at all. It is a service in high demand. I would like to share a couple of the many examples of how a short-term rental enhances the lives in this sharing economy. In July of this year, I had a couple stay with me for 1 month. Sean lives in New Jersey while his husband Gabriel lives in South America. Due to the travel ban, Gabriel was not able to enter the United States to be with his husband. They met in Canada and shared 4 wonderful weeks together in my home. Without the valuable service of short-term rentals through Airbnb and similar platforms, this couple would have had to postpone their trip to a more affordable time of year, or may not have been able to be together at all. Hotels in Toronto, especially during Pride, are extraordinarily expensive. By booking a short-term stay in my unit, this lovely couple were able to get a maximum amount of time together, and I am beyond proud that I was able to provide that for them. Families are constantly immigrating to Canada for a better life. I had the honor of hosting a family from India who stayed with me for 1 month while they searched for work and long-term accommodations. I served not only as a host for these newcomers to Canada, but my position on site allowed me to assist them daily with acclimating to their new lives in Canada. By providing them with various and valuable family resources, new Canadians desperately need, and sharing contacts for potential employers. I am happy to say Rohit has landed a good job in his field, and his family has settled into their first Canadian home.
Questions, Councillor Di Giorgio?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for your comments. So for someone in your, let's say, in your situation, if there are other people that own secondary units like yourself, and they have to choose between whether they'll make their unit available on a long-term basis or on a short-term basis, from an economic point of view, you think that might drive people to opt for short-term versus long-term rental? Like, I'm thinking, what are the likely competitive rates? Like, if somebody, let's say, has to look at renting their secondary unit at $1,500 a month, let's say, but on a short-term basis, they might be able to rent it at a higher rate. I don't know. I'm just wondering whether that would push people away from giving long-term rental or providing long-term rental.
I think there's.
I understand your situation is unique, and I agree with you.
I think there's benefits to short-term rentals. I, for one, would not want to be a full-time landlord.
Understood.
Because I know there's a lot of headaches involved, and if there ever came a point where you wanted the tenant out for whatever reason, not paying rent, it's a very, very difficult thing going through the landlord and tenant tribunal. So that's one of the reasons I choose not to rent long-term.
So are there a lot of landlords, do you think, that might shy away from all the troubles, that are involved with renting on a long-term basis?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Janis.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate the fact about the couple and their difficulties with immigration. How many days out of a year do you rent your home or your ensuite?
I would say, I've never actually added them up, but I would say maybe 50 to 60% of the year.
50 to 60% of the year. So that would be something like 180, 200 days.
Maybe a little bit more.
How much do you charge per day?
It depends on what time of year it is. This time of year, $89 a night.
So you're making around 20,000, would I be correct?
Around there.
Okay. Do you, and I know, I mean, like, do you declare that income as?
100%.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next public speaker is Barbara Wells. Barbara Wells. Barbara Wells. So we'll move on to Zach Mandlowitz, followed by Jennifer Graham and Melanie Ferreira. Good morning. Good to be here. Please
Hi,
go
everyone.
ahead.
My name is Zach Manlowitz, and I'm the president of the Home Sharing Service Providers. We're the coming together of several Toronto-based businesses that provide dedicated property management services for roughly 500 units in the short-term and medium-term rental market across the Greater Toronto Area. Our membership subscribes to a core set of service delivery principles. So, for example, we do some guest vetting services to make sure our primary users aren't partiers. As well, is everything okay?
Please go ahead. Just a little bit of a buzzing in the room, if we can just.
Okay, is it worthwhile for me to start over? Should I continue?
You have an additional 20 seconds, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So we subscribe to a core set of service delivery principles. So for instance, we do guest vetting to make sure our primary users aren't partying, and we have noise sensors in our unit so that if noise events do happen, we actually have data from these noise sensors to show that 96% of the time we can calm down noise events within an hour. So we're in support of regulation in theory and taxes in theory if it is done correctly. However, after doing a jurisdictional scan, we have concerns that the proposal will not achieve the result it seeks. So we did a jurisdictional scan. We looked at numerous North American cities, and it seems as though the regulation of commercial operators causes one of two things to happen. Either our industry is recognized, some form of a commercial operator's license is created, and our industry can be taxed to produce a net economic benefit for the city, or regulation targeting commercial operators is created, and an expensive enforcement body is set up. The industry does not comply, and the city essentially drives the economic activity underground. The proposed regulation currently falls into the latter category. And an example of this would be New York. So New York has an outright ban on short-term rental activity. They've got roughly 36 full-time staffers dedicated to enforcement. And what you're seeing is there's still 7,400 fully active listings. I don't mean listings that are just up. I mean listings with open calendars being frequently booked. And there isn't huge headway really going on here. Some North American best practice cities have created licenses that are principal residence licenses, but it's accompanied by some form of a commercial operator license. So that way we can drive compliance a lot higher. I would want to go through more cities, but in the interest of time, looking around North America, it's rational to expect that Toronto's compliance rate would hover around 10%, which means the industry simply wouldn't comply with it. With other North American cities that have used more of a commercial operator license, compliance can actually achieve close to 100%, which I think is better because we want to create regulation that people ultimately follow. This is a very complicated issue, and it touches numerous different categories. I understand 2 years have already gone into it. I'm going to wrap up, don't worry. If we look at other cities, LA is in their 4th year of looking at this issue, San Diego 3 years, Austin, which created, I guess, the shining example of regulation in this industry before it got reversed at a later time because their government changed. It took them 4.5 to 5 years to create it. So there's no shame in being able to take a step back, look at all the data, come with the most rational arguments we can, and create a system that works for everyone. I think we have an opportunity to be the gold standard for this industry across North America. It's just about whether or not we want to create a system that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Janis.
Thank you, Chair. Did I get it correctly that you said that Airbnb is not allowed in New York City?
There's an effective ban on it. Essentially, it's a bit complicated because it kind of goes down to the building level, because in each building in New York, they essentially don't really allow subleasing there. So it gets carried out on a building-by-building basis. I say it's an effective ban because the combination of the building laws as well as the Airbnb-specific regulation points to it as being a behemoth that goes against Airbnb in that city.
Is there any other cities that Airbnb is having difficulty with that you know?
In what sense?
Well, in New York, they're having difficulties about.
Yeah,
Is there any other cities in the world that are having these difficulties?
Yes, the history books are riddled with examples like this. A good example is New Orleans, that before initiating a commercial operator's license, it caused enough of a black market that it caused the whole city to reconsider everything and institute a commercial operator license. The city of Portland has a compliance rate of roughly 8%. Santa Monica spent $1 million to catch one person for a $2,000 fine. The history books are riddled with examples where the regulation just doesn't achieve its intended consequences.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next deputant, Jennifer Graham. Good morning.
Hello.
To have you here. You have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good morning, council members. My name is Jennifer Graham, and I'm an Airbnb host in Ward 17. I'm come this morning to share my experiences with you, and my husband and I have been renting a unit in our house since last December, and it's been a great experience for us, and we're hoping to be able to continue. I was troubled yesterday when I heard the news that there's been a potential nixing of the possibility of having a short-term rental in a secondary unit. In our house, my husband and I live on the second floor, and we rent out, when we're not using the main floor, we rent that out on Airbnb. For us, the possibility of not being able to do that I don't know what we're going to do actually, because we have a lot of family that lives out of town, and I would say about 20 to 25% of the time we use our main floor as a space for our family, because on our second floor we don't have any spare space. We have no secondary room. So we rely on having the flexibility that short-term rental allows us to be able to use the space when we need it, and then be able to still make some money off the unit when we're not needing it. And it's also something for us as a new family. If we are looking at the possibility of having children in the future, it's just a great option to be able to know that we have that flexibility to use the space and take that space back full-time if we need to in the next year or two. So another point I just wanted to make as far as secondary unit is that we have no problems with any nuisance with our neighbors. We've had, in 1 year, we've had 0 complaints from neighbors. We live upstairs, so if there is any time there is any noise, we can address it immediately, which is just a great thing. We're hands-on and able to deal with it. In the whole year, I've had 2 times where I've heard the tenants downstairs, and it's never even been at the point where I've had to go and address it. Another point that I just want to make is, as far as licensing and the fees that have been presented, I think that those sound fair, and I'm in favor of those. I think that just in general, it's a great option to have spaces that are in residential areas such as ours, because a lot of people that come and stay with us do have family that live nearby, and they're looking for someplace close by. A lot of people are in a situation, as my husband and I, where they do not have a secondary room or any place to host people, so we have a lot of people that rent our space in order to stay nearby to their family members. So it's just been a really great opportunity, let alone the fact that we've met many wonderful people, and it's just been personally a great experience for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, I do have a couple questions. First and foremost, Jennifer, good to have you here. Thank you, and good to have you in Ward 17. With regards to, are you in support of the secondary suites?
Yes, I am.
And you mentioned that you live on the second floor.
Yeah.
So the rooms on the ground floor, is that part of a self-contained unit?
Yeah. And when my husband was a bachelor, before we got married and before I moved in, he did rent it. But now that we're a family, we don't have, we just need more space. We don't have the option of having a long-term tenant. As I previously stated, we don't have any extra space upstairs, and so we rely on the use of that space for hosting. My parents live out of town, his parents live out of town, and many other family members. So.
I've been approached by a number of people from actually within Ward 17 that are part of the millenniums, and also we have seniors there that they do rely on that secondary income.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of your involvement within the community, in terms of being part of any residents association or whatever, are you part of any group in the area where you live in?
No, not currently. I'm actually not aware of any groups.
Is there any problems? Have you had any problems with the municipal licensing standards? Have you had any problems with, in terms of notice of violation for noise or whatever else?
With our unit, no, we've had no issues. And we have a very good relationship with our neighbors, and they're aware of our rental, our Airbnb rental, and yeah, we've had no issues.
I'm going to ask you just one question, the most basic one that I believe that everybody has in mind.
Yeah.
In terms of the financial aspect, why do you rely on this?
Yeah, for us, as I said, it's, we've just been married a year, and so we do need that extra income to help pay the mortgage and things like that of the rental income. If we were in a position where we weren't able to rent our secondary suite, if we had to switch to doing a long-term rental, we would have to move somewhere else. We couldn't have a long-term tenant and then also live upstairs how we do right now. We'd either have to take over both if we weren't able to do Airbnb, or we'd have to, I don't know, maybe rent our
Is the
unit.
question of affordability in terms of paying mortgage, utility bills, and whatever else, and that helps out with
And
that.
just having the space is just, yeah. We'd have to rent our unit maybe, and my husband and I maybe rent a 2-bedroom and then rent out ours long-term if we weren't able to do the Airbnb.
Thank you, Jennifer. Would it be possible to get a copy of your submission?
Yeah.
Or then I will be asking city staff to look into it as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Melanie Ferreira?
Yes.
Good morning. Good to have you
Good
here.
morning. My
Please
name
go
is
ahead.
Melanie. I'm here on a slightly different note. I'm a business owner. We have a little bistro on the Danforth at 1870 Danforth, and we do not host anybody, but we definitely host the customers that use the Airbnb around us. We being a little neighborhood restaurant and a little removed from the downtown core, we see firsthand how beneficial it is to us as small business owners to have the opportunity to host Airbnb tourists in our neighborhood. Few of our neighbors around have their homes on Airbnb, and we've only found them to be courteous and respectful. Often we hear from our diners that they have been referred to us through these hosts. We get an opportunity not only to showcase our food, service, but our neighborhood. And Toronto is definitely built by small neighborhoods that are wonderful and have lots to offer. I urge the city to continue allowing people to make their homes, their rooms, basements, or lofts available for short-term rentals. I believe we all can benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We have questions, and Vice Chair Karjanis.
Thank you and good morning. You said you run a small restaurant or a business?
Yeah, a small bistro.
Okay, so you would be in favor of the city spending money to advertise Toronto to bring businesses to your city?
Yes.
Okay. There's a proposal that we charge 4% destination tax for hotels that will go to promote the business. You're in favor of that, correct? I mean, if you want to propose to support your business and support Toronto, would you be in favor of that, of us doing it? It's in the books right now.
Probably.
Okay. So if I was to give you some numbers, do you know how much money that would be missing when people go to Airbnb? it'd be missing a few $1 million. So we would not be able to support, to advertise Toronto and to bring business to you. How would you feel about that?
When you advertise for Toronto, they do not come to small neighborhoods. They live in the downtown core. They're anyway going to all the attractions that are in the downtown core. I don't think a neighborhood like ours has attractions. And so, in fact, I think people here have the opportunity to come and
But these people that
experience
are,
local neighborhoods that they would otherwise not have the opportunity.
these people that are coming, they're coming to Toronto and renting Airbnbs in your part of the city.
Right.
So they're coming because Toronto is advertising, because Toronto is promoting, because we have an aggressive plan to bring people to Toronto.
Yeah, but everybody who comes to the Airbnb are not just tourists. So for example, there are people in our neighborhood, we live in small homes. We do not have enough room to host our families when they come. They use Airbnb. There are people who are going to the doctors or the hospitals.
I do not want to cross-examine or sound controversial, but I thank you for your answers. I really thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Pereira.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Douglas Gold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and councillors. Good morning. Great to be here and having the chance to speak about short-term rentals. I'm the Vice President of Policy for Toronto Region Board of Trade. We're founded in 1845. We have 12,000 members, and we have the vision to make Toronto one of the most competitive and sought-after businesses in the world. We believe that regulation should be clear, concise, and simple to understand. I think we agree with the principles that were put forward by the staff earlier today in the document we have. I want to provide a bit of a broader perspective on the importance and sometimes controversial subject of short-term rentals. Our perspective is grounded in our vision statement and the belief that Toronto has become a global city. It's now larger than Chicago and just behind Mexico, New York, and Los Angeles in North America. And we need to act like a global city, embracing innovation and the sharing economy. And I will note, for example, we put in, I think, a very impressive application for Amazon headquarters 2.0, and if Amazon chooses to go outside the United States, we think we've got a pretty good chance. Airbnb and similar platforms are, we believe, innovators, and we should embrace that innovation while ensuring we have the balanced regulation that we need and follow the principles laid out by the city staff. So the board's bottom line is that we would like to see as much innovation, flexibility, and options as possible in Toronto's accommodations market, and to deliver that clear, reasonable regulation, which is the path recommended by the bylaw that we have under consideration. I have 4 points I would like to make quickly. First, we need flexible accommodations opted for newcomers. There are 110,000 newcomers moving into the region every year, which is a huge benefit to us. We need to provide those newcomers with a variety of accommodation options. Secondly, we want affordable options for tourists, an important and growing market for the Toronto region, particularly given the impressive increase in the number of tourists from Asia. If you looked at the recent numbers from Tourism Toronto, in the wake of China's granting approved destination status to Canada. Third, we need to attract and retain talent. In fact, talent is one of the 3 T's, that's our policy mantra, of trade, transportation, and talent. And fourth, Toronto Region Board of Trade has recently completed a unique 3-part series in young professionals. In fact, it's been featured in the Toronto Star this week and past weeks, looking at the perceptions of young professionals and their expectations of the housing market based on a survey of 800 young professionals in the Toronto region. So this covered a very specific demographic representing the region's top earners and most highly educated young professionals. As our president and CEO, Jen Silva, said, if they are finding the market challenging, and they are, what does it mean for everybody else? High housing costs make it hard for young professionals even to save for retirement and repay debt, with 33% expecting to receive financial assistance from friends or family to finance their purchases. That's a lot of help from the bank of mom and dad. And we think that short-term rental can give young professionals and other young people additional income needed to
Thank you.
deal with that cost of housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions? If not, I do have one. Recognizing that Torontonians benefit enormously from tourism when it comes to restaurants, bars, retailers, entertainment venues, and which, literally speaking, translates into $5.1 billion in direct spending every year. So is the Toronto, you as a vice president of the Toronto
Region Board of Trade.
Region Board of Trade,
Yes.
do you support the recommendations that are before us in terms of the short-term rentals, including secondary suites? And if so, if you can expand a little bit more in terms of the benefits to the city, if that wasn't the case?
As I mentioned, Mr. Chair, we support broadly the principles and the conditions laid down in the document we have before us. I don't think our membership is particularly interested in the weeds. They're seeing an opportunity. They're seeing global transformation by players such as Airbnb and its other competitors, by the sharing economy in general. So we think the broad tableau is attractive to a growing city, a global city like Toronto. We're a little less concerned about, we've heard a lot about secondary suites and so on. Our membership is looking at the bigger question, the bigger opportunity, which we think we need to embrace.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
The next deputant is Paul Nedositko, followed by Jim Murphy, Daryl Chong, and Melissa Goldstein. Good morning.
Good morning. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I was here yesterday, had a chance to speak, identify what we do in terms of our home sharing activities. First of all, I live in, my wife and I have a house in Cliffcrest Community, Ward 36. We've lived there for 32 years, raised 2 children there. We've been very active in our community over the years. And Lena and I, right now, we struggle to make ends meet. We struggle to pay the bills and all the costs to continue to live in our house. And it's our hope that we can remain living in Toronto. We were born and raised here. We love the city. We love our community. And we were sort of struck with some unfortunate luck a number of years ago when we lost our career jobs. And when you have good income, things sail along nicely. You really don't give any thought to, $5, $10 here. But when you're confronted at the age of 50 with losing your income, which was roughly $120,000 a year, it's a scary proposition. Because at the age of 50, you're not thinking about starting a new career. You're kind of hopefully thinking about retirement. So to make a long story short, about 4 years after that, we started home sharing. We've been home sharing for 4 years now. We've had absolutely no issues whatsoever to ourselves, to our guests, our neighbors, our community from our home sharing activities. In fact, the neighbors on our street love what we do. They support what we do. And they often ask, how can we do it? Because we're struggling too. Last winter, I had a meeting with Josh Arnold, the Senior Policy Advisor for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, because I'm active in our community and I have concerns about ongoing gentrification and development intensification, and namely the adverse impact of infill builds in our community, because Cliffcrest has the highest number of infill builds going on. One of the concerns I expressed is the obliteration of what were once traditional starter homes in our community. And that's what got us into the housing market 32 years ago. They were small bungalows on large lots. and those homes are being obliterated. So just to give a little background of my involvement. So I had a meeting with Josh. We had a great meeting. It was an hour down on Bay Street. And then part of that discussion was the discussion about the province's Affordable Housing Act. And what Josh indicated to me, because I said, you know, we want to stay in the city, we want to keep our house, how do we, like, what do we do? So he identified the Affordable Housing Act, and that's been brought up here a number of times at various meetings that we've attended. Not only is the intent of the Affordable Housing Act to bring more inventory into the marketplace.
Thanks. I've been very lenient to have 30 additional seconds, but we have questions for you. Vice Chair Karjanis.
Thank you, Chair. Sir, I appreciate the hardships that you're going through, but if you were a barber, would you also run a barber shop down in your basement?
Not likely.
But I mean, if you had a barber shop and you lost your business, you know, rent was too high and all that stuff, and some of your customers still wanted to continue.
No, I respect the zoning bylaws that are in place. They're there for a reason.
Okay. So you wouldn't want a business being run next to your house then? You wouldn't want somebody running a barber shop? You wouldn't want somebody running a garage? I mean, like an auto body shop in his garage? Would you want that?
Well, actually, we did have that on our street.
Right, but you wouldn't want that?
It's not what I prefer to have, no.
Okay. Then if you're running an Airbnb, would you like to notify your neighbors, you know, next door neighbor and people across the street, hey, I'm running an Airbnb. There could be different people coming in, so don't feel strange that they're coming in. Just want to make sure that you
Our
know.
neighbors all know what we do. They support it 100%.
Okay, so you're not adverse then to your neighbors having a say that you know, then they feel comfortable that you're running this Airbnb?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no, hold, sorry, I have a
Sir, no, we have more questions for you.
I have two questions.
Okay, yeah, let me say this one. It's Councilor Burnside.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
I think you just got a curveball. I'm going to give you something a little straighter down the plate. Just for clarification of my own understanding, have you ever calculated how many people would go to a barber in a day?
How many people would go to a barber in a day?
Yeah, probably not, right?
Well, the one I go to, it's pretty busy.
Yeah, so maybe 20 or 30.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you see any, you know, these are 20 or 30 different people on a daily basis. Do you see any comparison to a barber shop and sharing your home?
And what we do?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay, thanks. Just for that clarification. So in terms of the recommendations, do you have any concerns with them?
Not at all.
So you're just really here to support the recommendations?
Yeah, and I look forward to hoping that we can all work with the city and make this thing work. It's,
okay. Okay, and in terms of when you share your home, do you have a secondary suite, or?
We do, yep.
Do you understand that that they've deleted the secondary suite in the recommendation?
Yes, and that's very concerning.
So you do have a concern?
Well, okay, that was yesterday's meeting. In the context of today's meeting, I don't have concerns with what's put forward on today's agenda, what we're discussing. I have absolutely huge concern about what happened yesterday.
So if secondary suites weren't allowed, if we sort of followed planning and growth's lead, and I'm a little unsure as to, I think we kind of have, because I think these things were, that recommendation was deleted, but if we were to follow that lead, that would be problematic for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question.
Okay.
Is Jim Murphy? Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Councilor. How are you?
Please go ahead.
My name is Jim Murphy. I'm the President and CEO of the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, FRPO. FRPO represents property owners, property managers, and suppliers of multi-residential rental properties across the province. Our members represent over 350,000 units province-wide. Staff report specifically that's before you today and was before the Planning Committee yesterday specifically recommends that multi-residential rental units be allowed to operate as short-term rentals. I'd like to offer a couple of comments on the report to clarify some of the misconceptions. The Rental Tenancies Act, which is the RTA, governs all landlord and tenant issues in the province. The RTA, for example, prohibits security deposits of any kind, and we know that some of the short-term rental sites require that, so that would be illegal under the RTA, for example. You can ask for, obviously, last month's rent, but other security deposits are illegal. The report before you states that tenants would not require landlord approval to rent their unit. This is false. The RTA specifically requires landlord approval to sublet an apartment. This raises serious questions for renters registering with the city and not having received prior approval, and the question of enforcement around this is raised. The RTA also prohibits charging more in rent for a unit than a tenant actually pays, so the person that's subletting can't pay more than the person that's there. So, for example, and Daryl Chong after me from GTA will talk about this, if the tenant's paying $1,200 a month, for example, in an apartment, that's $40 a night. They can't charge any more than that. Again, the question is who enforces that in terms of the payment. I want to pick up on something Councillor DiGiorgio talked about because it's a really serious issue facing our city. We face a housing crisis. At a time when Toronto is having a lack of supply, it seems odd that the city is formalizing ways to take needed rental units out of the market. The vacancy rate in the city is 1.3%. We'll get numbers from CMHC the first week of December. We'll be below 1%. And the comment that was made by one of the earlier presenters, used to be long-term, now I'm doing it short-term. I saw somebody on the weekend who had 2 condominiums in Bloor West. He used to put them long-term, now he's putting them into short-term. We have a real problem here of less supply, which is going to be less rental. And it's a real concern as people have options now to go short-term as opposed to long-term. And I actually don't think that's going to benefit tenants at all because of the powers and the rules that are in place to protect them under the RTA. Anyway, my time is nearly done, so I thank you for your attention. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we have questions for you. And Vice Chair Janis.
Yeah. Okay, sir, I take it that you're supporting of long-term rentals and not taking the affordable housing out of the market. Would I be correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let me share some numbers with you, and I'm just going to go slowly down. So you see, besides what you're supporting, we're also standing to lose close to $30 million. And I'm just going to read you the numbers, and then you can agree or disagree or whatever. If we're allowing 180 nights on Airbnb at $100 a night, that's $18,000. 13% HST, that's $2,340 per house. 10,000 Airbnb units, that's $23 million on HST. That's number one, money that we can use somewhere else. The same thing with the City of Toronto at 4% tax. The city's going to lose $7 million. So I'm glad that you're supporting us not to lose the secondary suites that we can rent out to people. But if we're losing $30 million because of Airbnb, how is that going to impact the people that are renters in the second unit, their schools, their hospitals, their roads? How's that going to impact them? $30 million.
I mean, if things are done under the rules, there's nothing wrong with that. The point of my presentation today was to say that the landlord-tenant relationship in the province of Ontario is dictated by the RTA, and there are rules under it. Those people are paying their monthly rent. They want to sublet for whatever time. I don't know how common this would be. So in a sense, that money's already been paid. But we're talking about losing units. We're concerned about that, and just also talking about the rules in terms of how approvals are given for rental, purpose-built rental.
Not only are you losing units that can be used for people to rent long-term, we're also using revenue and income.
I suppose that's possible. I would say most of that's going to be in your secondary market and people's principal residences and people's condominiums. you probably wouldn't lose a lot, I don't think, on the rental market. I could be wrong in terms of purpose-built rental.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Burnside, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. Just for some clarification, and I would call you an expert in this area, rental providers, you don't charge HST to tenants, do you? No, right, so not overly relevant. You are the CEO of the Federation of Rental Housing Providers, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so your concern is that this will have a negative impact on renters? I'm trying to understand, trying to get my head around
There's
what
two
your
concerns. The
concern
concern is that some of the comments that are in the staff report are inaccurate as they deal with the landlord-tenant relationship because of the Residential Tenancies Act. For example, prior approval of landlord to sublet. So I want to bring that to the attention of you and of the committee. So that is required in order for any sublet. My understanding is that provincial law supersedes a municipal bylaw. So there are a number of things in there for the charging, the security deposits. All these things are stated in the RTA. And, you know, in addition to other issues I won't get into. So that's one aspect of it in terms of raising those concerns. And so what we're saying is that, you know, the city should go back and have consultations around that in terms of how it deals with purpose-built rental. The second part of it is just a statement around supply, which is the city is facing a housing crisis. We have a low vacancy rate. It's going lower. And we're going to be taking units that were more for long-term out of the market and putting them in short-term.
So, okay, okay, the first part, I mean, they can, I understand, I kind of understand what you're saying, but the second part, you're worried about supply, right? Okay, so I'm just having a hard time getting my head around, and this, I mean, no disrespect, but you don't normally come to Depute on behalf of renters. Because you're on the other side, aren't you?
Well, I mean,
That's why I'm trying to understand really what
we're supporting supply.
motivation is.
We are supporting supply because there's a crisis. Our members want to build. Our members want to construct new. Our members are interested in building purpose-built rental. There's a need for it. People can't afford it.
What does that have to do with Airbnb or home sharing? I understand your issues, and I totally agree with you. I mean, we can get into the whole discussion about rent control and everything. Different discussion. I'm just having a hard time how this applies to home sharing and your.
So you had a deputant about 30 minutes ago who used to do long-term rental, and instead now she's going to do short-term rental. That means there's one less unit in the marketplace in the city of Toronto for long-term housing.
You're here on behalf of the rental provider, so that's what I'm still trying to get my head around.
We're talking about supply, because it's all one and the same. I mean, the city should be concerned about that.
Okay. Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question. You mentioned that housing affordability is an issue, and that's a big issue, and we all know that, and we understand the nature of the problem. And the vacancy rate right now, it's 1.3, which is percent that's the lowest in many, many years. But to bring this into perspective, the rental vacancy rate was much lower in the mid-90s, and by then, the rate was 6% in 2000, and that's long before we had these home sharing platforms in place. So how do you explain that? That's factual information, by the way.
Yeah, and as I say, we'll have new numbers out on vacancy. I think CMHC releases them the last week of November, first week of December. My answer would be it doesn't help. When you have a low vacancy and people can't afford to own, the average price of a single-family home in the city is $1.3 million. You have an affordability issue, and you have an issue that a lot of deputies have talked to, which is an issue around population growth, in terms of immigration, in terms of non-permanent residents, in terms of others that are coming from other parts of the country. So you have a population growth, you have household sizes getting smaller, you have an affordability crisis, all coming together and leading to real challenges on the housing market. We should be encouraging more supply.
No, I understand, and I think that we are all aiming for that. But my point, and I want a little bit of clarity from what you said, is in the mid-90s, when we had the secondary suites, the vacancy rate, as I mentioned before, it was 6%. So trying to understand the rationale in terms of it's fear-mongering, or are we dealing with factual information?
I mean, the vacancy rate is 1.3%. It's going to go lower. So it may have been higher at other times. It may have been lower at other times, too. I think in the late 80s, it was even lower.
In terms of affordability, you hear from a lot of people that many seniors, many people out there that they have big mortgages, they're struggling to survive, and they rely very often on this additional sense to be able. What's your take on that?
I mean, the issue on that is there's a difference between purpose-built rental in terms of who we represent and having the proper policies in place for approval to sublet that versus somebody who has their own home, because this bylaw affects a principal residence only, who wants to rent out a room or a basement or whatever. That's a different dynamic in terms of a different housing stock. This bylaw is more directed towards single-family home or condominium than it is purpose-built rental. My comments are related to purpose-built rental as if...
Don't you think the culprits are those who are investing heavily in condominiums and they are taking hundreds of thousands of units from the rental? Don't you think that's the main problem there?
Well, it'll be a problem if they, instead of putting them on for long-term rental, because the vacancy rate for condominiums for rental is below 1%. If they take those off long-term and put them into short-term, that will be a bigger problem, absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before we proceed, I do have a special, I'm sorry, sir. We have another question from Councilor DeGiorgio. I'm sorry, Councilor DeGiorgio. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
My question relates to this whole concept of purpose-built rental housing. I mean, one of the things, as I understand it anyway, is that when we talk about building purpose-built rental housing, it is in the affordability range. I find that very few people are building purpose-built rental housing in the high range. Would you agree with me, or?
That there's fewer building in the high range or lower in the...
Yeah, for example, if I'm a developer and I'm developing downtown, my inclination is to build condominiums and not purpose-built rental housing, simply because purpose-built rental housing in the context of affordability typically is deemed to be a Section 37 benefit, for example, but it's to protect the affordability range, which is well defined in provincial legislation, i.e. it's income-oriented, right? So I guess what I'm asking is, if there are secondary suites that are being rented out in the affordability range, I can understand supporting not eliminating those. On the other hand, if there are secondary suites that are well above the affordability range, why would we not allow those secondary suites to go on a short-term rental basis? I'm trying to designate between the two.
It's a hard issue. You know, I mean, somebody owns a unit, you're saying it only can be the principal residence. So for the condominium sector, a lot of people have 1 or 2 units, so that's going to be impacted. They may not be able to rent them or to put them in Airbnb because it's only principal. That's going to have to be enforced by the city.
Yeah.
And so that may have an impact. It depends. If the person thinks they're going to make more short-term than long-term, or they're worried about the rent controls long-term and what the rules are around that and how they're handcuffed in some ways as a landlord, that would come into consideration. I'm just speaking broadly in public policy, which is condominiums became the new source of rental after 1991. And 1/3 of all condos in the city of Toronto are rented.
Right, secondary market.
Yeah, are rented. And so, you know, are those people like the gentleman I met from Bloor West who's got 2 condominiums and now going to put them into short-term as opposed to long-term? I mean, in a sense, they're not really our members, so I don't have a view on it. But I do have a view overall about public policy and wanting more housing, not less, and wanting more affordable housing and not less.
Yeah, it's that word affordable that I'm having difficulty with, right? Yeah. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we proceed, I have a special request from a deputant, and that's Jeremiah Diaz, who has a commitment, and it's a conference at York University. So if Mr. Chang, Daryl, if you don't mind, just if we take the next deputant to allow him just to attend his conference at.
Thank you so much.
go ahead.
Today is the
2 minutes.
LGBTQ conference in Toronto with the Toronto schools. So I just need to get back so I can do my presentation. So thank you for being so accommodating. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the Indigenous territories of the Mississauga First Nations, New Credit, and Haudenosaunee. Moi, je suis complètement bilingue, alors ça me ferait tellement plaisir de parler en français, certainement, mais I know that the council is mostly Anglophone. I work for the Center for Gender and Sexual Diversity. We're a national organization that works across the country. And here in Toronto, we run the National GSA Conference, as well as the regional LGBTQ conferences for LGBTQ youth educators, as well as public servants and in broad civil society. The reason why I'm speaking today is to support the proposals by the city staff with a couple exemptions, especially because of the service that Airbnb and similar agencies do. The truth is LGBTQ, especially queer and trans youth, are some of the highest and most at-risk persons in the city of Toronto, and Airbnb has frankly saved people's lives. These short-term rentals provide an escape for young people who are escaping violence and oppression from their families or their home situations. And frankly, we don't have enough shelters that are safe. We don't have enough youth beds that are safe for LGBTQ youth, and until the new shelter is built, these provide a very critical space for these young people. As a charity, we're also really poor, and hotels in Toronto are really expensive, especially during Pride. So in addition to supporting LGBTQ youth, charities like us love Airbnb because we get to enter into people's homes and do charitable work in the city and spend tons and tons of money in the city of Toronto, as well as have a safe place to stay and meet cool and exciting people. Third, we're young, so hashtag innovation, hashtag this is awesome, hashtag get with the times, because seriously, Toronto needs to be a leader in this, not a follower. And let's just be honest here, this has nothing to do with the housing crisis in the city. A short-term rental in someone's home, this is not helping the situation by stopping my sister, who has a spare room, who lets me stay with her at Christmas, but who can't host a rental all year round. So I think we need to be honest with ourselves that displacing the challenges faced by one community into this community is necessarily the situation. I do want to mention that we don't like the 180-day rule. It's someone's house. Let them own it and let them decide how to use that space. I find it a little bit offensive that folks would think that they can tell people how to use their spaces, especially because, as was mentioned by the previous presenter, the condo market is the new rental. So people who are lower and emerging middle-class Torontonians are using the Toronto condo system to grow wealth and to become successful and productive citizens. And so we should not be punishing them for it. Also, we absolutely hate the secondary suites. I know when we take over a house, we love taking over a whole suite because we, as a small LGBTQ charity, can set up shop.
Thank you, Mr. Diaz.
Yeah, that's everything.
Questions? If not, oh, yes, and Councilor Giorgio.
So if I understood you correctly, and it's an interesting interpretation, you basically said if we permit short-term rental of secondary suites, we might in fact bring on market more secondary suites that will be rented out. Like if we just separate the fact that at this point in time, a lot of the secondary suites are actually rented on a long-term basis. Did I understand you correctly? You said, you know what, if we allow, or at least put out there, that we will allow people to rent their secondary suites on a short-term basis, we might have more people come forward to actually rent out.
Absolutely.
And share the rental of their share their living accommodation.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a number of these secondary suites end up becoming long-term rentals and becoming sustainable home for people. So absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I don't think it's fair to tell people how to live their lives and how to run their homes. I mean, it's a changing economy and changing times, and I'm so proud the city is so progressive in so many ways. I also want to mention that we did submit a written statement, so we encourage you to also read that because points were mentioned in that statement that I didn't get a chance to talk about.
Can you share that statement with the...
Already done.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thanks for being so accommodating. Good luck.
Thank you.
No, seriously, good luck.
Daryl Chung.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you. Hashtag. I'll have to learn what hashtags are.
Thank you there for being accommodating.
Oh, not a problem.
Good to have you here.
As you know, the GTA represents the providers of over 150,000 units of multifamily purpose-built rental in the GTA, with the vast majority of those in the city of Toronto. Our concern is that when this package is adopted by council, that the next day the headlines will simply read that all residents of the city are now allowed to get into short-term rental. And that's probably what's going to happen. But the headlines and even the details below the headlines aren't going to get into the rules, the legal rules and obligations of doing so. Not knowing the law isn't an excuse for ignoring it. And we are governed very much by the landlord, by the Residential Tenancies Act, also known as the RTA 2006. And the city needs to be very clear about the interplay of allowing short-term rentals across the city and the interplay with the RTA and the obligations that are in the RTA. Previous to him, Jim spoke about some of these provisions. Simply a couple of them that he said, I'll reiterate: security deposits, not allowed under the RTA. If you go to any of the short-term rental sites, security deposits are listed, not allowed. Under the RTA, a tenant cannot legally charge more than they pay for rent. Again, the example in my submission is typical rent of $1,200 a month divided by roughly 30 days a month is $40 a night. So you're breaking the provisions of the law if you charge more than that. This doesn't even mention the rents that are paid in subsidized housing. So for those rents, it's the actual RGI amount that's paid divided by 30 days a month. Under the RTA, a tenant's required to obtain landlord consent before subletting, also in the Act. So in the city staff report, I don't see any of this interplay mentioned. Our recommendation is the city, as it proceeds with this, is that it's very clear that there are other rules and obligations. I think it was slide number 8 that I saw in the staff presentation that said fire code, Ontario building code, and then it stopped. Nowhere in the report does it specifically say, and you must follow the rules in the provincially mandated Residential Tenancies Act. So we'd like that to be first and foremost and upfront, and everyone understand what that means. Without doing that, you're kind of endorsing something without telling the citizens of the city what the playbook is. And they could be unwillingly or unknowingly breaking the law and forcing the hands of eviction. So that's very important. A couple other things that the staff report doesn't do, and maybe it'll do later, it doesn't detail the process to deal with nuisances, complaints. You know, if all of a sudden there's a noise complaint, does the responsibility land on the operator or land on the owner of the building, which is an issue for us. And it doesn't mention anything about insurance. I know all of your sharing stuff requires insurance. We always recommend to tenants that they get insurance. The Insurance Bureau of Canada does the same. The city's Office of Emergency Management does the same, but the report's silent on that.
Thank you,
we hope those things are included. Thank you.
Any questions? Councilor Janis?
Thank you, Chair. Am I to understand, sir, that if I'm renting an apartment for $1,200 a month, I cannot rent that out in order to make more money?
Under the rules of the Residential Tenancies Act, you can't profit from that. So you can't rent it out for $1,300 or $1,400 or $1,600. That basically stops you from renting out 20 apartments and then renting them for more.
If I was to have permission from the landlord, would that make a difference?
No, these are two different clauses in the 140-page Act that are separate and unrelated.
So by going in that direction, could a tenant that is renting out part of the house through Airbnb and making more money be charged with any regulations?
So if you own the house, you're not charging.
I'm a tenant.
Oh, yes.
I'm paying $1,200. I got an Airbnb platform. I'm renting part of the house to somebody else, and I'm making $1,600 a month.
Yes.
$400. Could I be charged, and under which jurisdiction? I mean, provincially, municipally, federally, which?
You'd be breaking one of the conditions in the Residential Tenancies Act, so it would be the province.
So that would go where? Which board? Which court?
I guess the Landlord-Tenant Board would be the one that oversees all the RTA complaints.
And if I am a landlord and I give permission to the tenant to do this, would I also be charged myself?
So if you're the landlord and you're saying that you're giving consent to sublet, that sublet would be based on all the other conditions contained in the RTA. And one of those conditions is you don't rent it out for more than you're paying.
Thank you.
So I suppose you would be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just one question for you now. Given the check and balance that we have, especially with the provincially mandated regulations as it relates to the Residential Tenancy Act, on one hand, and the recommendations that city staff are putting forward, there's some check and balance there. Is your organization in favor or against short-term rentals overall? I just want to have...
Yeah, we're kind of not sitting on the fence. We don't typically support things, well, we can't support anything that breaks the law. And the way the staff report is written without being more clear or inclusive of regulations under the RTA, that means we're endorsing something that's not legally compliant. So we can't endorse it as is, but the pieces that are there, we don't have any real issues with, aside from the ones that I detailed. So right now, if there's a noise complaint and all the other neighbors in the apartment say, there's an issue going on in that unit, right now, they can call property standards, they can call a number of different places, and then the landlord's held responsible. But in this case, it's sort of a subtenancy. We need to know how that interplays, and we need to know if we're going to be on the hook, because we're not vetting the short-term renters, the host or the operator is. We have if it goes the way you propose it to go, we're on the hook for all the responsibilities without any other controls.
I get it, Mr. Chung, is given that here we have a disruptive platform that's here to stay, irrespective of how we look at it, because you can see in other jurisdictions as well. Now, it's kind of difficult to sit on the fence and to come here into the pews and not to take a stand.
Yeah. I mean, we sit on the fence because I can't say we endorse what you're doing because of the rules that you're not speaking clearly about. But once you address those, we understand that this is coming. We understand that we're not going to stop this new disruptive technology, and it's here to stay. It's probably going to grow. We're going to find out a way to work with it, but we just need to make sure that everyone understands the rules of engagement before they just misunderstand the headlines and think that they have broad and wide ability to do this without any rules or obligations. You need to be front and center with those.
Would you be willing to share those recommendations with the city staff?
It's in the report. I submitted a letter. It's a 2-page letter. It has it. I'm more than happy to go through the Residential Tenancies. I think your staff know it.
No, I just wanted to hear those recommendations so you won't be sitting on the fence any longer.
No, we're not. We're only sitting on the fence insofar that we can't say we support the reports before us because the reports before us are missing very valuable information.
But
if you address the concerns regarding the RTA and the obligations that are found in the RTA, then I think we're okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Melissa Goldstein. Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Melissa Goldstein, and I'm the chair of a group called Housing Action Now. We're a coalition of Toronto residents and community organizations that advocate for safe, decent, and affordable housing for all Torontonians. And I'm also an Airbnb host, and I've been an Airbnb guest, just on a side note. Overall, Housing Action Now supports regulating short-term rentals in the interest of protecting both the city's supply of long-term rental housing and the affordability of rental housing across the city. The city's rental vacancy rate is notoriously low, and Torontonians across the city are finding it so difficult to find places to live that they can afford that homelessness continues to rise. Young people can't afford to move out of their parents' homes, and people across the city have so few options that they end up stuck in unpleasant and unsafe living situations. The rise of short-term rentals is worsening this already bad situation by taking long-term rental units out of the rental market and by increasing the value of rental properties in particular neighborhoods, thereby further inflating rents. On top of this, the conversion of long-term rental units to short-term rental units is resulting in the often illegal eviction of Torontonians from their homes.
Excuse me for a second. Sorry? Councilor Janis, Can you please just, the busing is a little bit disruptive, we cannot. You have an additional 10 seconds, please go ahead.
So on top of this, the conversion of long-term rental units to short-term rental units is resulting in the often illegal eviction of Torontonians from their homes. Low-income people, students, and families are being forced out of their homes and into the cutthroat rental housing market in favor of high-paying tourists. So while the city's proposed regulatory framework is an excellent start, there are a few significant issues with it that need to be addressed. First, we think that making proof of principal residence should be mandatory. The registration process for short-term rental operators should require that they register both themselves as operators and their principal residence as the property they are renting, and that registration should require proof of principal residency. If a principal residence is defined as the residence used in your government records for things like your income tax, medical services plan, driver's license, and vehicle registration, then any of those government documents could be used as reliable proof. Without this mandatory proof of residence requirement, subverting the law will be incredibly easy and enforcement of the bylaw will be next to impossible, making the bylaw ineffective. And because there's been discussion about why principal residence versus one property per resident of the city, the same idea. If it's one property per resident of the city, it allows, let's say you've got a family of 4 people, then 4 people could each be renting a property. It's not tied to their home. It's just an easy way, I think, for people to subvert the purpose of the bylaw. The second is effective proactive enforcement. A plan for the proactive effective enforcement of the bylaw must be developed and implemented. Without a plan to be proactive about enforcing the bylaw, again, it will not be followed and the problems the city is currently experiencing as a result of short-term rentals will worsen. And then, as was addressed yesterday, short-term rental operators should not be permitted to rent out secondary suites. Short-term rental operators should be limited to renting out their principal residence. The short-term rental of secondary suites seriously undermines the city's goal of protecting long-term rental housing stock in 2 ways. First, the rental of secondary suites make up a significant portion of the city's rental market, especially in the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. And it's in these neighborhoods where units are most at risk of short-term rental conversion and require protection by the bylaw.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you for your presentation. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thorben Widitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors.
Over here. Please go ahead.
My name is Torben Weiditz. I'm here representing Fairbnb, which is a national coalition of organizations and groups and individuals with an interest in regulating the emerging short-term rental market. I want to make a few points here. I feel there is like an elephant in the room that we're not really addressing. We spend a lot of time talking about home sharing, which I don't think anyone in the room has a problem with. We all agree that home sharing has something to do with someone sharing their home occasionally or rooms in their home in a place that is their principal residence. This will be around. Airbnb will be around. People have the opportunity to find places on Airbnb doing major events, doing Pride and all the rest of it. But what we need to be talking about is the commercialization that has been going on under the umbrella of home sharing. And the city has done a tremendous job in highlighting the fact that there are about 3,200 properties that have been taken off the long-term rental market by absentee landlords. And I think that's what we are addressing here. So when we listen to the executives behind me, we are really listening to the commercial industry that is talking to you. In the city of Toronto, 16% of the hosts make up these absentee landlords. They are responsible for about 38% of the listings inventory and 52% of the revenue. So we really have to come up with regulations that allow us to tackle this problem, because what we're seeing right now is a reallocation of rental housing stock that is there for long-term tenants to live and work in the city to a short-term rental market that caters to tourists and guests. We need to understand that the commercial industry that has sprung up is taking advantage of the city's residential housing stock, and we need to put a stop to it. I just have one, I'm in support, Fairbnb is in support of the city's position. I just want to share something with you very quickly. And you are very familiar with this. These are all activities that require folks in the city of Toronto to have a proof of ID, like to provide a government issue document to show that who they are actually who they are. And we just want to make one amendment to the, proposed regulations, which is that if you are a host that wants to receive a short-term rental permit in the City of Toronto, go ahead, receive the permit, but be prepared to show that you are the actual principal resident in your unit. Have government ID to provide evidence that you are a principal resident, and save the city a lot of resources and money at the back end on monitoring and enforcement by putting Airbnb and other short-term rental companies in the position to actually do the monitoring for the city by only allowing hosts with registered properties on the platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Vice Chair.
Sir, I understand that you are representing the hotel industry, the workers at the hotel industry?
That's right. I'm a researcher with Unite here Local Center.
Most of those hotel workers, do they have to go some sort of compliance to make sure that there's no criminal record and the hotel to be bonded?
For a lot of cases, you have to provide, even if you want to run a business in the City of Toronto of any sorts, you have to provide a police certificate, a criminal background check, and these kind of things.
How much? I mean, I've mentioned this figure before. How much money? By going down this route, we'll be missing $30 million. Can you let us know how much the hotel industry has come down since Airbnb has come in, or is Airbnb providing a?
We have seen that the hotel industry in Toronto, broadly speaking, has been doing pretty well. But what we have seen is since the 2000s that the growth of mid-scale hotels in the downtown core has been stagnant. And the growth has been stagnant in the downtown core, which has partially to do with, if we look at where the hotel rooms in the downtown core compete with, they compete with residential condominium towers that exist right across the street from the largest hotels. If we talk about 3,200 rooms, this is the equivalent of 3 Royal Yorks that have been added to the supply in the City of Toronto that exists in the commercial gray area that we need to get a handle on for sure.
So the people that you represent will not be against making sure that the people that are actually running the Airbnb or any other platform like this, they go under the same regulations, or your folks getting police clearance, making sure that the people that are going in there and the people that are arriving to use their home, they're safe. And a lot of hotel operators, I mean, there's no ghosts, there's people there 24/7. So would you agree that we need to have the resident in the house when the guest comes for the Airbnb purposes?
I think the city staff has struck a pretty good compromise to ensure that we are actually talking about home sharing with proposing a principal residence requirement. I think if this requirement is something that actually has teeth, by ensuring that those folks that run a short-term rental property have to show upfront that they're actually the person that live in this building, I think we would avoid a lot of the health and safety issues that we have seen in the City of Toronto with illegal hotels popping up that are essentially death traps and fire hazards and all the rest of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is any other questions? Thanks so much for your presentation, sir. Jessica Isrek. If I'm mispronouncing the last names, please forgive me.
Isadek, thank you.
Please
Good
go ahead.
morning, City Council. My name is Jessica Pisarek, and I'm a renter. In April 2016, my partner and I moved into 38 Kensington Place with 3 other friends. We were both students, and we chose a location due to proximity to the university, as well as the vibrant and diverse community in the building and neighborhood. We were friends with other units, and many of us worked in nearby restaurants, businesses, and institutions in the neighborhood. Some of us were members of the LGBTQ+ population, a community that often faces housing insecurity and discrimination. Unfortunately, our building was one of 5 Kensington properties sold to a new property owner. Almost immediately, we faced intimidation, harassment, and threats of illegal rent hikes and illegal eviction. The landlord claimed he was moving in family members, which was untrue. We did not feel safe in our homes, and we did not have the time or means to take our case to the Landlord-Tenant Board. I felt I was forced to leave my home or see my schoolwork and education suffer. We had to move, which divided our families and was both incredibly stressful and costly. We left September 2016 and the units remained empty for many, many months over the winter. In May 2017, our unit had been put up on Airbnb in preparation for the lucrative summer months. I have looked over the city's proposal and I'm extremely grateful the city is taking the housing supplies issue seriously. I would like to reiterate some of the proposals made by other organizations. Firstly, making proof of principal residence mandatory. Second, effective proactive enforcement. Even when renters have the law on their side, enforcement is not always available or effective. And third, short-term rental operators should not be permitted to rent out secondary suites. It is important that housing meets the needs of those who live and work in Toronto. I'm a newly graduated nurse who'll be working in a hospital in the downtown core. And if I can't find housing close to my workplace, I'll not be able to make it to my 12-hour shifts, and I might be another nurse that moves out of the GTA. Housing access and supply is a real issue and has huge implications for the well-being of Toronto residents. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Thanks so much. Lisa Censante, followed by Emily Raisin. Please go ahead, 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Giansante. We had new owners move in September of 2017, and it's being operated as a short-term rental. It has been operating next door since the change of ownership. No principal resident staying there at all. This is outlined in a PowerPoint presentation that I supplied for you called Hi, I'm Your New Neighbor. It is not owner-occupied. It is used strictly for short-term rental income. The rental ad on Airbnb includes events of up to 100+ people. Welcome. And that can be seen in the appendix that I've attached to the PowerPoint. This is a residential community of single-family homes where there is no commercial properties in the vicinity. Since September 2017, we've had 2 incidents to date. On October the 4th, there was a strange person on my driveway as I was about to leave to visit my elderly father. The stranger was on my driveway for about 20 minutes and even proceeded to sit on my vehicle and talk on the phone. Needless to say, I was uncomfortable leaving my own home. This past weekend, November 11th, carrying into the 12th of November, an all-night party. Partygoers coming and going throughout the night from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. At least 20 cars at any given time, 6 or more on the owner's driveway, parked throughout the street, inhibiting traffic. Parking was on both sides of the street, allowing only 1 car through at a time. Car alarms were going off throughout the night. Partygoers walking up and down my driveway between our cars to get to the party next door. Partygoers were on my driveway kissing. A car parked on my driveway blocking both of our cars. I could not leave if required to do so for emergency reasons. Given the surroundings and people outside, we felt we had to escort our teenage daughter up our driveway to the house upon her return that night. A fight broke out at 6 a.m. with multiple participants outside in front of our home, including vulgar language, which I will not repeat, with repeated threats. Police were contacted but did not attend the scene. Garbage strewn all over the road and culverts, including pizza boxes, McDonald's, drinking cups, so on and so forth. Local residents and neighbors picked up the bulk of the garbage the next morning. Community and safety concerns. Certain patrons do not have the same level of respect for property or neighboring properties. They walk freely across the properties. Short-term rental owner is generating revenue at the expense of neighbors. We have to deal with cost of fencing, cost of security systems, lack of sleep affecting work, and our personal living conditions. While there's more options for tourists, negative impact on the residents who support the city all year round. I will skip to the standards. Principal residence. What is the standard for principal residence? Who is going to investigate? Is it up to the neighbor to investigate, keep logs, etc.? Coordination with other levels of government for declaration of principal residence.
Thank you, Ms. Giansante.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes, we have some questions. Councilor Burnside, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. What platform was this?
Airbnb. And we did forward a complaint and received a response, which is on the last page of the appendix. So there's 2 pages of appendices. One is the actual listing, outlining the emphasis on parties, and the next page is the listing itself and the response we received from Airbnb.
That was just this past November? Like the
Just
November,
last
like,
week,
This last weekend?
just
Yeah.
last weekend.
So, okay, it's now what, Thursday? Have they reached out to you in any other way?
No,
So just, if I'm not mistaken, this is what you got back. It's, hi, Peter?
yes, my husband. My husband's the one who sent the email outlining the same.
We shared your complaint with your neighbor and gave them some suggestions to address the issue. Thank you for helping to improve our community. Thanks.
That's right.
That was it?
That's it.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Kajianis?
Thank you. In view of what your experiences is, and, you know, I have to tell you that I share some of your concerns because I've had these parties on my street. Would you be willing to make sure that, I mean, would you be supportive of that the landlord, quote unquote, lives in the house while he's renting it out?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you be supportive that the landlord also provides a police clearance to the people that are going in the house know who are they going to stay with?
Absolutely. I've had a police check done just supporting
Would you
my
be willing
Children's
to
Hockey
have,
Association.
if somebody wants to turn their house into an Airbnb, that they consult their neighbors before they turn it into an Airbnb?
Absolutely. None of the neighbors were consulted.
So you have this individual, he buys the house, he turns it into an Airbnb, and you are held hostage.
Correct. It's a 7-bedroom house. They're charging $1,000 a night plus a $500 cleaning fee.
$1,000 a night.
Yes. It
And
sleeps
how
16
often-
people.
And how often is it rented?
It's been rented. We've been keeping a log. To my knowledge, so far, it's been 6 days, 6 to 7 days.
When did they buy it?
The house officially changed hands in September, and they bought all the furniture, and the only thing they moved in was an added boardroom table with a number of chairs and some additional beds.
So they've made $6,000 within 2 months.
Plus, correct.
So they more than likely will make $12,000 to $15,000, which pays their, part of their mortgage.
Correct.
And part of their taxes.
Correct.
Have you met your neighbors next door? The people that
We
are-
have. They've given us their name. They have a different name on the Airbnb website. So we're not sure what their actual real name is. I've spoken with Municipal Licensing and Standards, one of the provincial officers, and they did indicate that they would investigate. And I'm not the only concerned neighbor. I just happened to have the time to come down here today.
So you were held hostage and you couldn't go out to see your ailing father because
Correct.
Airbnb brought these individuals next door to your house.
That is correct.
And the only thing you got, thank you for helping to improve our community.
That is correct.
Now, does that sound to you like you're helping to improve, they're helping to improve your community, or they don't care about your concerns?
They don't care about my concerns whatsoever. And I feel that the city, the police, their hands are a little bit tied in this.
Have we
case.
failed you?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, we are going to break at 12:30. I think that we still have, we can deal with one more deputant. Emily Raisin?
I appreciate everybody's pretty hungry, so hopefully I'll be quick and to the point. And my name is Emily Raisin. I'm the COO of Canada Stays, which is a Toronto-based vacation rental marketplace with tens of thousands of properties across Canada. And I apologize to your last speaker for that happening, because in our world, most of who rents these properties are large families looking for kitchens and laundry facilities and places to congregate with large families and their kids to be able to not have to look at them through a door through, what are those, shared hotel rooms. When you have little kids, that's really difficult. So most of what we deal with are these large families looking for accommodations that hotels can't serve. Also, as someone who has run an out-of-the-cold facility for 21 seasons now, I know the issue of long-term housing, and the issue of long-term affordable housing in particular is difficult, and I applaud the council and the committees for working hard to try and address the issue. However, I truly believe that these second homes are not the answer to that particular issue. This inventory that we hold as Canada Stays would never meet the definition of affordable in the first place, and these properties are never going to go into long-term stock because these property owners would rather let it sit empty. I do support the draft regulation, though, that's in front of you. I really do. I think that it's a good, really good measure on addressing a lot of the affordability housing crisis in Toronto. But from my perspective, excluding secondary residences, and that's what I really want to talk about, excluding that secondary home, literally a second home, is what I think needs to be included back into the legislation, and for a couple of reasons. One is it's going to reduce inventory in an already underserved hotel market. My husband, who grew up in Willowdale, his family would often, they're all interspersed all over the world, they'd often come for a visit and have nowhere to stay that was close by to their family. So it was always an issue and always almost a running joke of the family. And I also know that it's going to reduce tourism in very local communities, because if people come and rent a house in Willowdale, they're actually spending money also in Willowdale. They're not just coming for the downtown attractions. So if people are renting in High Park, they're going to spend money in High Park. And that's what I look at the vacation rental market and saying, these families are coming to Toronto. There's no stopping that, and we want them here. Tourism is through the roof, and we're happy to have them. Let's figure out a better way to get them accommodated in larger homes that satisfy their requirements. I urge you to consider putting back onto the table the discussion around second homes in the legislation before you, and I thank you for sharing my perspective, for letting me share my perspective.
Thanks so much for your presentation. Any quick questions?
Quick.
And thanks so much for your presentation. Members of the public and members of the committee, we are going to recess and we'll reconvene at 1:30 and hopefully sharp. Thank you.